Chapter 13, 1975. We Need an Organization. When Lama Yeshe and his old friend Jhampa Tinley had been students together at Sera in Tibet, one of their dearest teachers had been Geshe Ngawang Gendren. He had died in Tibet before Jhampa Tinley departed Lhasa for Nepal. Before his death, Geshe Gendren was recorded as having said, "There is no more reason for me to live. It is negative and immoral in Tibet now, so it's time for me to go." He lay down on his right side, his right hand supporting his head in the manner of the reclining Buddha, and simply left his body. Geshe Gendren also told Jhampa Tinley how much he liked his students' home and wanted to return to it. One night in Kathmandu, Jhampa Tinley's wife, Ngawang Namgyal, dreamed she was holding a baby who was a lama. Shortly afterwards, she discovered she was pregnant. Jhampa Tinley often visited Lama Yeshe at Kopan and stayed overnight to enjoy a good laugh together and devise business plans. And on one such occasion, he told Lama Yeshe about his wife's dream of a pregnancy. Lama Yeshe flew into action immediately, obviously with some inkling that this baby was the reincarnation of Geshe Ngawang Gendren. Months later, after the child had been born, Marcel recalled, "Lama came back from Kathmandu one day and told me he had discovered the incarnation of his teacher. I asked him how he knew. He said that he had made a mandala offering to the young boy, and immediately a strong, clear vision of his former teacher had arisen in his mind. That this child was indeed the reincarnation of Geshe Ngawang Gendren was later confirmed by Kyabshi Trichang Rinpoche, who formally recognized the tulku. The child was named Kelsang Punsok Rinpoche. Lama Yeshe was over the moon when he first brought the little boy to Kopan. He is still my teacher. He is my teacher without words. He is my teacher forever. His face is exactly the same as it was last time. It's incredible. He uses a very high communication, not at all like a baby. His mind is fantastic," Lama Yeshe enthused. In January, Kelsang Punsok Rinpoche was to be enthroned at Kopan. After that, he became known to all as Yangtze Rinpoche. By then, he had already been living at Kopan for some time, sleeping in what was known as Lama Yeshe's big room, a long upstairs room with beautiful Tibetan carpets located at the front of the Gompa building and kept for formal receptions. Lama Yeshe spent most of his time in a tiny bedroom opposite Lama Zopa Rinpoche's equally small one. In time, Yangtze Rinpoche came to share Lama Lundup's little room with him. Prior to the big day, Lama Yeshe had everybody at Kopan cleaning the place and painting buildings with whitewash. He borrowed many Tibetan carpets, furniture, brocades, and excellent tankas, so that Kopan looked prosperous and beautiful. Everybody at Sera had known Geshe Gendren, and Jhampa Tinley's family was well respected in Kathmandu. 500 people, including 100 Westerners, attended the elaborate enthronement ceremonies. As longhorns on the Kopan Gompa roof sounded out across the valley, in the first morning light, one could make out the misty shapes of guests coming up the hill. Lama Zopa Rinpoche was required to wear gorgeous ceremonial brocades befitting his rank as a tulku, an honor he did not appear to enjoy one bit. Yangtze Rinpoche arrived wearing a tall yellow pundit's hat and dressed in fine robes. He sat on the highest throne in the Gompa and behaved impeccably. Afterward, everyone lined up to offer katas to him and receive his blessing. It was Kopan's first big celebratory puja. As an offering, the little monks each received 10 rupees plus a whole loaf of bread to themselves. In honor of the day, Jhampa Tinley donated several large, very beautiful statues to the Kopan Gompa. The group Lamrim retreat that had begun in December after the end of the 7th meditation course was still in progress. Lama Yeshe was very keen for his Tibetan visitors to see Westerners doing meditation. At his request, the retreaters did not interrupt their schedule, and the group did all their usual meditation sessions right through the entire enthronement ceremony. Many curious Tibetans peeked into their tent to look at the very unusual spectacle of more than 40 Westerners meditating under Marcel's guidance. From that day onward, Yangtze Rinpoche sat in pujas alongside the other 3 Rinpoches. He had a terrible habit of falling asleep. Sometimes I'd wake up to find grains of offering rice stuck to my forehead from the table in front of me, he said. When the boys fell asleep during puja, Lama sometimes took one of the large brass water bowls off the altar and placed it square on top of the offender's head. That usually woke them up. However, he did not treat the little Rinpoches in this manner. Their rank gave them certain privileges. As a result, some classmates revered them, while others were jealous of the leniency accorded them by Lama Yeshe. The respect with which Lama Yeshe treated Yangtze Rinpoche was a model to all of how one should treat a tulku. Perhaps he's trying to show us how to treat himself when he comes back, mused the Injis. But no one wanted to talk about Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. No one could consider the prospect of him dying. Tim McNeil, an American, returned to Copan for Yangtze Rinpoche's enthronement. He had attended the 4th course in 1973, and in a private interview confided to Lama Yeshe that he was a homosexual. He asked me what I did, but I was too shy to answer, said Tim. I was only 22 at the time, but I knew my sexual orientation. I had a famous homosexual Jesuit uncle in the United States, John McNeil. He was expelled from the Catholic Church and wrote a controversial book, The Church and the Homosexual. It was the first time I had come out to another human being. Lama was utterly matter-of-fact and accepting. All men have feminine Dakini energy in them, he told me. An American nurse, Lenny Cronish, came to spend just 2 weeks hanging out at Copan and occasionally sat at the back of the Gompa during meditations. One evening I was wandering around when Lama appeared from the other direction. For about 30 seconds he just stood with me and kept saying over and over, "Thank you, dear, thank you so much, dear." I wasn't sure what he was thanking me for, but I felt appreciated through and through. Next thing, in a swish of energy, he was gone. Suddenly I started shaking inside and felt an incredible stabbing pain in my chest. I fell to my knees and sobbed for 15 minutes. Lama Yeshe's Geshe degree. Shortly after Yangtze Rinpoche's enthronement, the Lamas went to Bodh Gaya for His Holiness's winter teachings. From there they went to Varanasi, where they called on Geshe Legden, one of Lama's teachers from Sera, who held a teaching position at the Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies at Sarnath. I invited them to my place for dinner and noticed that Lama Zopa was very skinny and unhealthy looking, Geshe Legden recalled. Lama Yeshe was very concerned that Lama Zopa refused to eat meat because it was bad karma. I told Lama Zopa, "You've got to look after your health, even if it does mean eating a little bit of meat. If you don't nourish your body properly, then practicing Dharma properly is difficult. I have never come across any particular point in the Vinaya Sutras saying monks may not eat meat, except in relation to impure meat, when an animal is slaughtered specifically for you." Lama Zopa thanked me for saying these things, and we debated long on the pros and cons of the issue. Geshe Legden also spoke to Lama Yeshe about completing his Geshe degree. I said it was good karma to do it, even though he has even greater knowledge, experience, and realization than a Geshe. I reminded him that one of the rules of Sera J was that if any Geshe finds the big offerings he has to make as part of the examination a financial burden, he is exempted from making them. He told me that he would love to do the Geshe examination, but no longer had the time to do it. I went to the monastery and looked up the list to find out when it was Lama Yeshe's turn to sit the examination. I even put his name down for it by offering a kata. But it's true, he just didn't have the time. He had started a tradition in the West and was too busy opening centers, teaching so many students, and doing so much marvelous work. Later, all the monks acknowledged that none of them had done nearly as much as he had to bring the Dharma to the West. My gut feeling is that Lama Yeshe felt that if he was cooped up in the monastery as abbot or geku or administrator, the kinds of things he might be required to do if he completed the degree, he wouldn't have time for his or other unprecedented and unparalleled work. From Sarnath, the Lamas returned to Copan for Losar, which fell on February 12th, During the celebrations, Lama asked the Westerners to show him some Inji dancing. Lama's monks and nuns were reluctant to do so because dancing to music was against their monastic vows. However, since their guru had asked, Steve Molaski and the youngest nun, Spring, got up and did some rock and roll jive in their robes. Lama rolled on the floor crying with laughter. At the end of January, Lama Yeshe had given the Sangha a Manjushri initiation. After Lhasa, he gave 4 nights of commentary on the meditation practice and retreat, completing them just before leaving to go on tour again. That summer, several Sangha and lay people did Manjushri retreat in the Kopan Gompa, while Yeshe Kadro, Sangha Kadro, Thupten Pemo, John Fay, Dieter Kratzer, and Bonnie Rothenberg went up to Laudo to do theirs. From Lama Yeshe's Manjushri teachings. Most of the time, our objects of joy are not limitless. We discriminate. Our minds are funny. They decide, this one I like, that one I don't. We divide things into pieces. It doesn't come from the side of the object. It comes from our own mind's decision. We see a person and automatically our mind goes, I'm not happy with him. He gives me no pleasure. It doesn't come from him. It comes from your dualistic determination that has already created divisions in your own mind, so that when you see people, you automatically categorize them. This creates difficulties. It causes conflict and complications and psychological bother. Do you see how fantastic Lord Buddha's psychology and scientific understanding of the mind is? How well he explains how the mind works? If you can understand this, you'll see it's really too much. It's amazing. You don't need too many words to describe it. It's beautiful and really so simple. Anyway, when we talk about limitless love, we're not talking about cement. We're talking about living beings. Most of the time, our conflicts arise from contact with other human beings, each other, not from dogs or cement. Westerners are always going on, oh, the environment is no good, that's why we have problems. This house is no good, this food's no good, that's why I'm unhappy. So much emphasis on externals, which is completely opposite to Lord Buddha's scientific knowledge wisdom, the way Lord Buddha thinks. We should check up our everyday lives here. We always blame outside things for our problems. Shopping is difficult, Kathmandu is difficult, and so forth. Actually, this is a deep subject, a very deep subject. It seems simple. It's not at all simple. If you think about it properly, your ego will freak out. When you actualize Lord Buddha's teachings, your ego has no space. I always emphasize how in our daily lives we are always involved with other human beings. If you can see everyone around you as a friend, that will be beautiful. That will be your mandala. You'll be happy wherever you go. In a way, you can say those around you are symbolic of all sentient beings. Look at a person you know. That person symbolizes your mandala. If you can be happy around that person and everybody else you know, perhaps you can be happy anywhere. Experiment, at least in your mind, on the basis of your interactions with that person. Visualize yourself in various situations or in different countries and see. The people around you put you into different situations, so if you check correctly, you can see how you'll react under different circumstances with other sentient beings. Doing this is really worthwhile. Ngawang Chodak returned to the mountains for his Mahakala retreat. I had vowed not to write anything at all during retreat because it was such a distraction, said Chodak. But the morning after I finished the mantras, a chant appeared in my mind, and I spent the whole day writing it down. That night I walked down to Thupten Choling to see Tulku Rinpoche. He sent me off to do another retreat in a remote cave in which there was a handprint supposedly made by an emanation of Padmasambhava. He had pushed his hand into the rock and it just squished up between his fingers. The imprint was so clear you could see the lines. Michelangelo could not have carved it any better. Ngawang Chodak's English translation of the Mahakala praises, the chant that had appeared in his mind, became a standard text within Lama Yeshe's organization. His work is acknowledged in the colophon traditionally printed at the end of the translation. Leaving Kopan to go on tour. This year's international tour had been meticulously planned to take 8.5 months. Dr. Nick was to accompany the Lamas as attendant, tour manager, and porter. One night when we were getting the passports and visas ready, I went up to the lamas to get them to sign some forms, and said Nick. I went to Lama Zopa's room first, but he appeared to be asleep, so I went to Lama Yeshe's room and got his signature. What about Zopa? He asked. I told him I thought Rinpoche was resting. Lama jumped up and rushed into Rinpoche's room, but Rinpoche didn't stir. Lama Yeshe grabbed him by the shoulder, shook him, pulled him off the bed onto the floor and said, Sign these papers. There's no time for sleep. I felt terrible, but that was Lama, the wrathful disciplinarian. Nick himself had just spent an entire year as a disciplinarian of the Western monks and nuns. Since he was about to go on tour with the lamas, Lama gave the job of IMI Gegu to Marcel. On the day of departure, February 22nd, everybody on Copan Hill lined up with cutters and incense, tears in their eyes, as the lamas took their leave. 8.5 months without them seemed like a lifetime. As usual, both lamas had continued to work right up until the last moment. Lama Yeshe giving Manjushri retreat instructions until 1 that very morning, and Rinpoche having just completed his extensive commentary on Jojo, which he had started during the 7th course over 3 months earlier. This year, Rinpoche was not at Copan to lead the annual March-April course, and so for the first time it was taught by a Westerner, Marcel Bertels. He gave 2 lectures a day and led meditations, while Thupten Pemo led the discussion groups. From this point on, it became a regular practice at Copan for a Westerner to teach the spring meditation course, and for the November course to be taught by Rinpoche. The first port of call on this tour was Domo Geshe's Sumten Churling Monastery in Gum, to collect a number of boxes containing the things they had left behind at Buxa and Villa Altamont. The lamas and Nick flew to Badrapur in eastern Nepal, and from there went by road to Darjeeling. They took the stored belongings back to Tushita Retreat Center in Dharamsala via Delhi, arriving March 1st. Over the next 10 days, they attended His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Lhasa teachings, visited colleagues, and received many visitors. While at Tushita, Lama held more public examinations for a number of Injis. American Tom Wagner met Lama Yeshe there for the first time. He stood at the door greeting people with a big warm smile and told me to sit right at the front. There were about 150 people crammed in there, with Geshe Ngowen Dagi and some other Geshes. Massimo Corona went first, and he did all right. Next was a young monk, Jumpa Zangpo, who got stage fright and just couldn't speak. Lama Yeshe sat right next to him, rocking back and forth with his eyes closed, saying kindly, "It's okay. It's okay." He was just wonderful, related Tom. It was Nick's first visit to Dharamsala. While they were there, the lamas took him to meet their root guru, Kyabje Trichang Rinpoche. "He looks so old and frail," said Nick. As we came out of the room, Lama said, "Did you see Haruka? Did you see Haruka?" It was a phrase Nick never forgot, especially since he had to disappoint Lama by replying in the negative. Disciples are supposed to see their guru as one with the meditational deity. The day before the lamas departed, they had an interview with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, after which Lama Yeshe, with Nick's help, wrote the following document. To whom it may concern. At a meeting on Tuesday, 11 March 1975, at 2 p.m., His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet authorized me to collect material for a book, the tentative title of which is Tibetan People Today. His Holiness requests that all assistance be given me for this purpose. Therefore, I require factual information, statistical, historical, and pictorial, and shall also have to visit sites populated by Tibetans to see the conditions that prevail and talk to the people myself. Whatever help can be given will be gratefully appreciated and gratefully received. May this be highly beneficial to Tibetan people everywhere. Thupten Yeshe. The letter was stamped with the seal of the Council for Home Affairs of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The International Mahayana Institute, IMI, was growing all the time and had started holding formal meetings at which minutes were taken. On the morning of March 12th, the Lama's last day in Dharamsala before departing for Delhi in the evening, 5 new monks and 1 nun were ordained into the IMI with Lati Rinpoche presiding. They were Americans Bonnie Rothenberg, John Fay, Dexter's Yogi Pryor, and Jeffrey Webster, along with Dieter Kratzer and Bruno Le Guevel, the French student to whom Lama had given the remote Vajrasattva empowerment at Laudo the previous year. All these new monks and nuns received the first name Kunchok. The Lamas also arranged for 15 IMI monks and nuns to have an hour-long audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama on that afternoon. Dieter Kratzer later remembered that day very well. When we took Getsul ordination, we were all terribly nervous, Dieter said. We couldn't even keep our shin-ups up and were shivering all over. Dr. Nick helped with the preparation. He was already ordained and very experienced. When he saw the state we were in, he proclaimed loudly, "It's all cancelled." First there was shocked silence, then hilarious laughter broke out. Nick had broken the tension with his remark, "I've always felt tremendous gratitude to wonderful Dr. Nick, who was a shining example to everyone." A month later, on April 11, Piero Cherry, Tuptim Pende, Ngawan Kedub, Steve Molaski, Gareth Sparham, and Alan Wallace, a student of Geshe Rupton, received Gelong ordination from His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. Lama Yeshe had begun to feel some concern about his Western monks and nuns' financial situation. It needed to be secure if they were going to be able to study for any length of time, and he wanted to establish some kind of income-generating scheme for them. He had begun thinking about this more and more, but it would be some time before anything started to come together. Embarking on the 1975 teaching tour. Leaving India behind, the Lamas and Dr. Nick flew to Bangkok, where they stayed at the YMCA. Very high temperatures and humidity left Lama Yeshe so exhausted that Nick became worried. It was the first time he'd observed the effects of heat on Lama. Nevertheless, no invitations were refused, and the two Lamas taught a weekend course organized by Dick Robinson and Meredith Hassan to 60 people while they were there. Lama Yeshe rushed here, there, and everywhere, and never ceased patting women's hands, which shocked some Thai monks who never touched women. He also met with a Sera monk, Geshe Losang Tenge, who would join Lama Yeshe's organization a few years later, and with Zaseb Tuko, a graduate of Freda Bedi's Young Lama's home school, who had come to Thailand to study Vipassana meditation under direction from the Council for Religious Affairs in the Tibetan government in exile. "Oh, that's too bad," Lama Yeshe said to Zaseb Tuko. "I need you. It would be nice if you could go to Australia." A couple of years later, this would come to pass. Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and Nick arrived in Sydney on March 19. Electric Roger, a Sydney local, had rented a house for them in the quiet suburb of Sutherland for 6 weeks. Lama Zopa Rinpoche could do retreat there while Lama Yeshe taught. Then Lama could do retreat while Rinpoche taught. Roger acted as Rinpoche's attendant at the house, but Lama Yeshe preferred to be alone and to do his own shopping. A few days later, Lama Yeshe and Nick flew to Melbourne to stay with Bia Rebush. All the old Kopan students in the area, mostly Nick's friends, were delighted to see him. Bia, too, had become very devoted to Lama, so much so she failed to notice the way he treated her beloved son, which was abruptly to say the least. "Bring this, get that, now." Nick tried hard, but Lama was unrelenting. Peter Giuliano, a graphic designer who attended 3 Kopan courses, designed and produced posters for Lama Yeshe's talks in Melbourne. There was also a poster for Mount Everest Centre, an educational phenomenon with no parallel in the world today for training future teachers and translators. 50 young Tibetan and Sherpa children aged 9 to 19 being trained in philosophy, logic, psychology, religious doctrine, science, math, English, art, sewing, printing, cooking, gardening, and other necessities of life. One of the main purposes of this tour was to raise funds for the school. Lecture at Melbourne University. When Lama Yeshe arrived at Melbourne University to give a lunchtime lecture, Adrian Feldman was there to open the car door for him. I hadn't seen Lama since the 6th course. Before I had even opened the door, he thrust his hand out the open window, grabbed my beard, and pulled my head down. "I remember you," said Lama. "You're the one who asked all the questions." By then I had done a Goenka Vipassana course, taken refuge, and become a Buddhist, said Adrian. From Lama Yeshe's talk at Melbourne University on March 25. When I talk about mind, I'm not just talking about my mind, my trip. I'm talking about the mind of each and every universal sentient being. The way we live, the way we think, everything is dedicated to material pleasure. We consider sense objects to be of utmost importance and materialistically devote ourselves to whatever makes us happy, famous, or popular. Even though all this comes from our mind, we are so totally preoccupied with external objects that we never look within. We never question why we find them so interesting. As long as we exist, our mind is an inseparable part of us. As a result, we are always up and down. It is not our body that goes up and down, it's our mind. This mind, whose way of functioning we do not understand. Therefore, we sometimes need to examine ourselves, and not just our body, but our mind. After all, it is our mind that is always telling us what to do. We have to know our own psychology, or in religious terminology, perhaps our inner nature. Anyway, no matter what we call it, we have to know our own mind. Don't think that examining and knowing the nature of your mind is just an Eastern trip. That's a wrong conception. It's your trip. How can you separate your body or your self-image from your mind? It's impossible. You think you're an independent person, free to travel the world, enjoying everything. Despite what you think, you are not free. I'm not saying you're under the control of someone else. It's your own uncontrolled mind, your own attachment that oppresses you. If you discover how you oppress yourself, your uncontrolled mind will disappear. Knowing your own mind is the solution to all your problems. Meeting with psychiatrists and social workers. That afternoon, there was a question and answer session for 30 psychiatrists and social workers in the conference room of one of the city's largest public hospitals, Prince Henry's, where Nick had trained for 3 years as a medical student and worked for 3 years as a doctor. Several of the psychiatrists there had been his teachers. For 90 minutes, Lama Yeshe explained the Dharma approach to mental problems to a critical and cynical audience, whose questions were designed to trip this Tibetan monk up. After all, he was not a doctor, but what he said was impressively clear. By mental illness, I mean the kind of mind that does not see reality, a mind that tends to either exaggerate or underestimate the qualities of the person or object it perceives, which always causes problems to arise. In the West, you wouldn't consider this to be mental illness, but Western psychology's interpretation is too narrow. If someone is obviously emotionally disturbed, you consider that to be a problem. But if someone has a fundamental inability to see reality, to see things as they really are, and understand his or her own true nature, you don't. Not knowing your own basic mental attitude is a huge problem. Human problems are more than just emotional distress or disturbed relationships. In fact, these are tiny problems. It's as if there's this huge ocean of problems below, but all we see are the waves on the surface. Among the topics they discussed was the issue of anger and aggression. Question. Some Western psychologists believe that aggression is an important and necessary part of human nature, that anger is a kind of positive driving force, even though it sometimes gets people into trouble. What is your view of anger and aggression? Lama. I encourage people not to express their anger, not to let it out. Instead, I have people try to understand why they get angry, what causes it, and how it arises. When you realize these things, instead of manifesting externally, your anger digests itself. In the West, some people believe that you get rid of anger by expressing it, that you finish it by letting it out. Actually, in this case, what happens is that you leave an imprint in your mind to get angry again. The effect is just the opposite of what you believe. It looks like your anger escaped, but in fact, you're just collecting more anger in your mind. The imprints that anger leaves on your consciousness simply reinforce your tendency to respond to situations with more anger. But not allowing it to come out doesn't mean you are suppressing it, bottling it up. That's also dangerous. You have to learn to investigate the deeper nature of anger, aggression, anxiety, or whatever it is that troubles you. When you look into the deeper nature of negative energy, you'll see that it's really quite insubstantial, that it's only mind. As your mental expression changes, the negative energy disappears, digested by the wisdom that understands the nature of hatred, anger, aggression, and so forth. Question: where did the very first moment of anger come from, this anger that leaves imprint after imprint? Lama: anger comes from attachment to sense pleasure. Check up. This is wonderful psychology, but it can be difficult to understand. When someone touches something to which you are very attached, you freak out. Attachment is the source of anger. Lecture at La Trobe University. On March 27, Lama Yeshe gave a lunchtime lecture to 100 students at Melbourne's La Trobe University. To me, it felt like there were only 3 people there, just Lama Yeshe, my friend, and me, said one man who attended. Everyone else was completely silent. Whereas we 3 laughed hysterically throughout the talk, I decided I wanted to hear more from this Tibetan monk. That evening, Lama gave a public lecture in the city. Peter Fenner went along with his friend Aldous Balotis. Aldous was becoming unhappy about his growing drinking problem and conscious of the fact that his life was beginning to unravel. Lama Yeshe sat there in the lotus position like a rock for what seemed like hours of silence. Then he opened his eyes and said, "Tonight I want to talk about mind." I thought, oh. Afterward, the only thing I could remember about that talk was those deep, intermittent silences. Everyone was absolutely spellbound, I thought. This guy is really something. This is not just books. This is not just tradition. This guy talks right from where he is at, recalled Aldous. An incident that really impressed Peter Fenner was Lama Yeshe's response when someone from the back of the auditorium called out, "Please, may I have your attention?" Lama turned to him, tuned in, and after a full minute of silent meditative attention said, "Thank you, dear." Something took root in me then, Peter said. From Lama Yeshe's Melbourne public talk on March 27. Look into your mind. If you fervently believe that all your enjoyment comes from material objects and dedicate your entire life to their pursuit, you're under the control of a serious misconception. This attitude is not simply an intellectual thing. Check more deeply in the mirror of your mind. You will find that beyond the intellect, such an attitude is indeed there, that your everyday actions show that deep within. You really do believe this misconception. A mind that has such strong faith in the material world is narrow, limited. It has no space. Its nature is sick, unhealthy, or in Buddhist terminology, dualistic. In many countries, people are afraid of those who act out of the ordinary, such as those who use drugs. They make laws against the use of drugs and set up elaborate customs controls to catch people who smuggle them into the country. Examine this more closely. Drug taking doesn't come from the drug itself, but from the person's mind. It would be more sensible to be afraid of the psychological attitude, the polluted mind that makes people take drugs or engage in other self-destructive behavior. Instead, we make a lot of fuss about the drugs themselves, completely ignoring the role of the mind. This, too, is a serious misconception. It's much worse than the drugs a few people take. The problem is that we don't understand the psychological nature of the mind. Misconceptions are much more dangerous than just a few drugs. Drugs themselves don't spread too far, but misconceptions can spread everywhere and cause difficulty and unrest throughout an entire country. All this comes from the mind. The problem is that we don't understand the psychological nature of the mind. We pay attention to only the physical substances that people take. We're totally unaware of the stupid ideas and polluted misconceptions that are crossing borders all the time. Recognize the nature of your mind. As human beings, we always seek satisfaction. By knowing the nature of the mind, we can satisfy ourselves internally, perhaps even eternally. But you must realize the nature of your own mind. We see the sense world so clearly, but we're completely blind to our internal world, where the constant functioning of misconceptions keeps us under the control of unhappiness and dissatisfaction. This is what we must discover. It is crucial, therefore, to make sure that you are not laboring under the misconception that only external objects can give you satisfaction to make your life worthwhile. As I said before, this belief is not only intellectual. The long root of this delusion reaches deep into your mind. Many of your strongest desires are buried far below your intellect. That which lies beneath the intellect is usually much stronger than the intellect itself. Sitting at the back of the hall was Max Redlich, a successful meat wholesaler. Many of his friends had become Lama's students, but he found their devotion ridiculous. He was talking about emptiness, and this guy asked if you would lose your personality if you realized emptiness. Lama said no, and shrieked with laughter. The guy was ready with more questions, but Lama was just bursting with laughter, and I think that's when he got me, said Max. Inevitably, there was a question about the popular author Lobsang Rampa, who wrote a number of exciting books based on his supposed life as a Tibetan monk, such as The Third Eye and Living with the Lama, which he claimed was dictated to him by his cat. He was later revealed to be the son of a British plumber who had never been to Tibet and did not speak Tibetan, but who declared he had been possessed by a Tibetan spirit he called Tuesday Lobsang Rampa. Now the question was put to Lama Yeshe, had the author really been possessed by the spirit of a Tibetan Lama? Lama replied, I don't think this kind of possession is possible. You should check what he wrote more carefully. There are many mistakes in his books. For example, when he talks about lamas being able to open the wisdom eye, he says it is done surgically. That's not right. The wisdom eye is a metaphor for spiritual insight. It is opened by lamas who have the key to wisdom. Besides, people who genuinely have realizations don't talk about them. Those who talk about realizations don't have them. The Dramana Course. Lama Yeshe students in Melbourne booked the Don Bosco camp in the bayside town of Dramana on the Mornington Peninsula. 85 people attended a 5-day course there over Easter, with Nick teaching the lower realms and suffering part in Rinpoche's absence. It was a sophisticated crowd, including many friends of people who had been to Kopan and who were wondering what on earth their mates had got themselves into. Lama Yeshe was ready for them. Not only are you people mentally strong, you are also skeptical. That's good. Lord Buddha's teaching is skeptical too. This meeting of skeptics is excellent. Do you understand what I mean by skeptical? I mean you don't easily believe or accept anything. You check and experiment to see if something works or not. If it doesn't, you keep checking, using your brain, your wisdom. In that way you grow. This is all part of the path of inner freedom, liberation, and enlightenment. Just believing what someone tells you emotionally without understanding has nothing to do with any religion. Even though you might pretend, I'm such and such, it's just a label and still an ego trip. The two departments of ego and attachment work together in your mind, and as long as they do, whatever sense pleasure you enjoy, wherever you go, whatever friends you have, nothing lasts. Your ego makes a wrong projection on an object, and your attachment follows without hesitation and gets completely stuck on or tied to that object. This splits and severely agitates your mind. I'm sure you can philosophize intellectually that things are impermanent, but if you check more deeply into how your ego interprets objects, what it projects onto them, you will find that it's expecting them to last and perceiving them as permanent. When two people get married, the ego's interpretation is that they should be together forever in life and even in death. This is so exaggerated. It's impossible for people to make that decision. It's not up to them. It's up to karma. Uncontrollably karmic energy makes a decision whether one partner lives and the other dies. When one finally does, the other misses him or her so badly and suffers enormously. All that worry and weeping, missing, and memory comes from the two mental departments of ego and attachment. Not understanding the impermanent nature of phenomena and expecting to live happily ever after as interpreted by ego and attachment brings the reaction of misery. That is a karmic result or effect. If you understand impermanent nature, there's no upset, miserable reaction. You accept death as a natural thing. In fact, you expect it to happen. With understanding, there's no worry. You know separation is natural. Therefore, instead of blindly following the grasping and attachment that result from the way your ego interprets things, it's better to renounce. Perhaps you think that when I tell you to renounce, I mean that you should get rid of all your possessions. But true renunciation isn't physical, it's mental. It doesn't refer to what things are worth monetarily, but to how your mind views them. Your mind makes things seem very important because it does not see their reality and overestimates their nature. When you know that phenomena are changeable, transitory, and impermanent by nature, you expect things to disappear. Of course, everyone knows this intellectually, but when you meditate on the sensations of your body and mind, you experience their automatically changing nature. That's not intellectual philosophy, but your own personal experience. Other objects such as your family, friends, material possessions, or whatever else may be your biggest object of attachment, are the same in nature. Everything is transitory and momentary. Nothing lasts. We cling to these things because we think they are helpful, but try to ascertain whether they really help or harm your mind. Perhaps instead of inducing peace, they disturb your peace of mind. You check up. A camper trailer, what the British call a caravan, had been rented for Lama, and it was there that Adrian Feldman had his first private interview with Lama Yeshe. I sat down beside him on the bed and told him I had taken refuge and wanted my life to be as close to the Dharma as possible. I saw two ways of doing that. One was to become a monk. The other was to live with someone, share Dharma, and develop with them. I was hoping he'd recommend the second option, but all he did was roll around on the bed laughing. When he stopped, he said, "Possible, dear, but very difficult. Instead of one crazy mind, you have 2, 3, 4 crazy minds, plus all the problems of food and education." "So what about ordination?" I asked. Again he rolled around the bed laughing, then sat up, glanced at the sky with a shrug and said, "Practice Dharma 24 hours a day." I knew this was the real answer to my question and felt this iron hand grip my heart as I thought, well, I've got to be a monk. At Dramana, Lama Yeshe taught the meditation that would become his signature meditation, an adaptation of the inner heat or two-mode meditation. Lama called it the seed syllable meditation. Even though seed syllables were not used, however, Lama was leading his students toward them. Relax and be comfortable, free of expectations, but with strong concentration. Visualize the central channel as a transparent hollow tube, about a finger's breadth in diameter. It runs in front of the spinal column, starting at the crown of your head, down to the lower or sex chakra. Also visualize the right and left channels, slightly thinner than the central one. They start at your right and left nostrils, running up toward the top of your head and then curve over to run down the right and left side of the central channel respectively. The right channel is red and the left is blue. Finally, they turn inward to join the central channel, about 4 fingers' breadth below the level of your navel. Visualize at your crown chakra a small reservoir of blissful. Repeat. Visualize at your crown chakra a small reservoir of blissful silvery white energy, looking a bit like mercury, and inside the central channel at the level of your navel, a burning hot ember the size of a sesame seed. To help visualize this, you can imagine actually reaching into a fire, taking out an ember and placing it there. Feel the intense heat of this red-hot seed. In order to generate more heat from the seed, first gently contract the muscles of your pelvic floor, concentrating on the internal rather than the external muscles, and in this way bring energy up your central channel from the lower chakra to the seed. Then gently take a full breath through both nostrils. Visualize and feel the air passing down the right and left channels simultaneously. To strengthen the feeling of the air actually going down the channels, you can swallow after inhaling. This air energy enters the central channel, where the right and left channels join it, and merges with the energy you have brought up from below. As you hold your breath, push your diaphragm down gently in order to firmly compress the energy brought down from above. Like blowing on red-hot coals in a fire, this compression of energy from below and above causes the red-hot seed to glow hotter and brighter. At this point, you can touch your navel with your hand to help focus your concentration at the proper point. Hold your breath only as long as it is comfortable to do so. Do not wait until you have to gasp for air, but rather relax your tensed muscles and exhale slowly, gently, and completely. Although physically the air leaves through the nostrils, visualize that heat begins to rise up through your central channel toward your heart chakra, and keep your concentration on that area. Then immediately tighten your inner pelvic muscles again and inhale a second time. Feel the energy come up from below and go down from above, and compress the seed once more, making it glow even hotter and brighter. Small flames begin to emerge from it. Repeat this process until you have taken 7 breaths, fanning the flames of the seed until it is burning very brightly and sending extremely hot air up the central channel, where it begins to burn away the blockages at the heart chakra. After the 7th inhalation, when there is a feeling of intense heat at the navel, the now extremely hot and glowing seed syllable remains at the navel chakra, while you visualize strongly and feel its flames blaze up through the central channel. They rise up to the crown chakra, totally burning away the knots of negative diluted energy blocking the central channel, especially at the heart and throat chakras. This heat will rise automatically. The heat reaches the crown chakra and melts and releases the pure white silver blissful energy found there. As this silver energy melts, it slowly begins to flow down the now clean and clear central channel. As this energy is flowing downward, feel an extremely beautiful, blissful sensation at every point it touches, particularly at the throat and heart chakras. When the blissful energy meets the heat energy of the seed syllable at the navel chakra, the blissful energy suddenly becomes very powerful, as when adding fuel, such as gasoline, to a fire. It can be helpful to relate this blissful feeling to sexual pleasure. When it reaches the lower chakra, the blissful white silver energy spreads from the central channel through the many secondary nadis to every pore and every atom of the body. The whole body's nervous system is completely filled with the silver white energy. Concentrate on this blissful feeling without expectations, intellectual thoughts, and tension. Relax and experience the blissful feeling. Just let it be. This is transcendental happiness, since while having such an experience of bliss, you are still maintaining conscious awareness and control, while increasing your wisdom and understanding. In this way, it differs radically from such ordinary experiences of bliss and sexual pleasure, or other sensory enjoyments that are limited and uncontrolled, causing you to become more unaware and ignorant. While concentrating on the blissful feeling as the mind wanders to various objects of attachment, rather than becoming totally distracted, absorbed in the thought vision of the object of distraction, concentrate on the subject of this thought, that is, on the mind perceiving the distracting object. In this way, the distracting thought will disappear. Then return to concentrate on the blissful feeling. After some time, in order to discover the nature of feeling, analyze whatever feeling you are experiencing in the following 4 ways. Is the feeling permanent or impermanent? How? Why? Is the feeling blissful or suffering? How? Why? Is the feeling related to the nervous system and the mind, Or is it unrelated? How? Why? Is this feeling self-existent or non-self-existent? How? Why? Back at Beer Rebushes, Lama Yeshe made himself at home. He watched TV, played with Beer's little poodle, Bobek, and did some cooking. He telephoned Tibetologist David Templeman and once again invited him to tea. I only had some very low-grade Tibetan tea that time, but I brought it, said David. We sat in front of the TV with a huge pile of cakes and watched the coverage of the chaos taking place at the end of the Vietnam War. Lama was not agitated as we watched people fleeing for their lives, but sitting beside him, I noticed him becoming warmer and warmer, more than warm. It was like sitting next to a furnace. He didn't try to hold back the tears, and neither did I. Then he turned to me and said in English, "Now they are refugees, just like me. Now they will have big suffering." I got the impression he was right in there with them, that he was one of them, going through every second of their pain. It was a very strong experience. During this time in early April, Lama returned to Melbourne University to speak at the School of Architecture's Prince Philip Theatre. 3 nights of talks designed as fundraisers for Mount Everest Centre had been arranged. Included in the program was a film of the Gutok monks performing chants in London and a delightful exhibition of paintings done by the boys at Copan. At one talk, somebody posed a question in the form of a single obscure and pretentious word. "You are not trying to communicate," Lama replied. Another night a girl asked him to explain what karma was. "You are karma," he told her. A man at the back called out, saying he didn't understand Lama's answer. "No, because that answer was not for you, but you understood it, didn't you, dear?" said Lama, looking at the girl. She agreed that she did. Sydney. After this 3-lecture series, Lama Yeshe left Melbourne for Sydney, accompanied by Nick. Sometime later, Inta McKim, a psychologist who attended several of Lama's talks in Melbourne, generously offered her Fitzroy House to Lama's students in Melbourne for group meditation on Wednesday nights. This was the beginning of the first Melbourne Centre. While in Melbourne, Dr. Nick had contacted his former anatomy professor at Melbourne University's School of Medicine, introducing Lama as Dr. Yeshe from Lhasa. I told him Lama wanted to look at how medicine was taught in the West, so we had free run of the anatomy and pathology museums. I showed him hearts affected by rheumatic heart disease with aortic stenosis and mitral incompetence, like he had, said Nick. Back in Sydney, Lama told Rinpoche about this visit, and Rinpoche said he wanted to see the anatomy sections too. So off they all went to the University of Sydney Medical Museum with their driver Gloria Searle, who had attended the 4th Copan meditation course. Rinpoche was totally fascinated by the dissecting room. At the door there were babies in glass jars and faces I didn't have time to finish looking at. There was also a huge tub filled with arms and legs in formalin, which had a certain smell, he said later. In contrast to Rinpoche's understated description, the sight and smell had nearly made Rinpoche vomit at the time. The lamas walked around clicking their tongues and shaking their heads, remembered Gloria. Later, when I drove them back to their house, Lama told me that meat is very strong medicine and sometimes you have to eat it. At Copan, he told me that my son, Adam, should eat meat. I stayed for dinner, during which I asked Rinpoche how much he ate. He told me, a handful of rice and 1 hour's sleep a day. I wasn't quite sure if he was joking or not. It was now time for Lama to do retreat in the rented house, while from April 11 to 20, Nick taught a 10-day course on the 37 practices of Bodhisattva at a nearby retreat facility. Rinpoche stayed in a private room on site and guided Nick during the course, giving a couple of talks on the emptiness sections of the text and offering the 8 Mahayana precepts toward the end. At the conclusion of the course, Lama Yeshe came and gave refuge to 12 students and lay vows to 7. After this, they spent a day with Namgyal Tsering, the only Tibetan living in Australia at the time. That evening, Mummy Max arrived in time for 3 more public talks in Sydney, including a Chenrezig initiation at the Chinese Buddhist Society, where, half chanting and half singing, Lama told the rather solemn audience, "You will have 100% permission to enjoy this moment just as it is, and all moments just as they are." The first course at Chenrezig Institute. Lama Yeshe gave 2 lectures in Brisbane before he and Rinpoche arrived at Chenrezig Institute for a month-long meditation course, the second such course held outside Nepal. 120 people enrolled for it. Anila Ann and her team had all but finished building the Gompa on that steep, empty land at Yudlo. The work had been done mainly by volunteers, qualified tradespeople turning up just in the nick of time and seemingly out of the blue. Anne raised the money to pay for every plank and nail, though she was still living in the old shed. Once again, caravans were hired for the Lamas and Mummy Max, who was not impressed. I said to Lama, "Oh God, Lama, what karma you have. These camper trailers, no roads, no nothing. It's not for me, it's for them," he told me, recalled Max. Lama had a big vision for this center. In 1974, he had told them, "Think big, think big." That year, a horse called Think Big won the world-famous Melbourne Cup. In 1975, Think Big won the Cup again, and no one had thought to place a bet. The course ran from May 5 to June 1st. Mummy Max did not attend, nor did Kathy Victor, with whom Lama Yeshe spent some time cooking. He showed me how to save time by squashing things with your hand instead of cutting them up. It worked just as well. He made a casserole one day by opening cans and just squashing the contents into bowls and saying mantras over them. Lama always said mantras while he cooked. He put so much physical energy into mundane stuff like it was a really important part of his life, said Kathy. Lama's students presented him with an electric razor, despite the fact that he had only about 20 whiskers. He preferred the Tibetan method of plucking them out, with a small engraved brass clip during quiet breakfast with Mummy Max. Cameras always appeared when Lama Yeshe was around. Everyone loved new photos of him, dancing on the beach, sitting in meditation, laughing, playing. With the idea of commissioning a statue of Lama, Max arranged for a series of shots taken just of his head from every angle. He posed for these graciously and without any self-consciousness. Pete Northend and Colin Crosby worked hard on the new building, but Lama Yeshe wanted his wild partying, hard drinking Xingzhou to enter a 13-year retreat. "I just couldn't do it," said Pete. "No way." Meanwhile, Electric Roger was thinking to becoming a monk. I spoke to Lama Yeshe about it in Sydney. He said I should check up whether I could renounce everything, even food. He said if I wasn't ready to do that, I could start a centre in Sydney. When I got to Chenrezig, I had an interview with him in the Gompa. He was sitting alone in the middle of the room. I knew I was supposed to prostrate to him, but I still couldn't bow down to a person. So I turned and prostrated to the altar instead. When I told him I wanted to take robes, he just said, "Now or at Kopan?" I said I'd come to Kopan. Lama Yeshe invited Mummy Max to give a talk on what had led her to take ordination. Max was not used to this kind of thing. Lama further honored her by insisting she sit on the teaching throne while speaking. Peter Fenner arrived in time for one of Lama Zopa's specialties, the death meditation. "It shifted something for me," recounted Peter. "I knew about my dark side, so I loved the idea of purification. I met Lama Yeshe alone in the Gompa and asked him to be my guru. I had a list of questions I didn't even get to ask because he answered them anyway. In the space of about 20 minutes, he also articulated the next 20 years of my life. He suggested I come and live at Chenrezig with my wife and daughter. I want you to become a university professor and teach Dharma," he said. It wasn't exactly what I was planning, but I had total confidence in him. On May 24th, Lama wrote a letter to Judy Weitzner in California, asking her to write the book His Holiness the Dalai Lama had requested, Tibetan People Today. "Please choose right name that is perfect, suitable, and pays attention. Maybe make a documentary movie. Please, you set up and organize should we adopt a legal name. You put your ideas together on paper and send to me in California. I had been asked to organize Lama's first meditation course in the U.S., but was at a loss as I had never attended a course and didn't know what they wanted or needed. When I came back to Nepal in 1975, I found that Lama had asked Wang Mo to organize it. I stayed on in Nepal, where Lama told me he had a very big job for me, said Judy. He said he wanted to start an organization to show the world the beneficial aspects of Tibetan culture and help preserve them. The emphasis was more cultural than political. At that time, very little was known about Tibet or His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the U.S. A week before the end of the course, after Guru Puja in the Gompa, Lama Yeshe asked everyone to come outside to celebrate the Buddha's birthday by meditating together on the hill. Lama and Rinpoche sat above us, high up on the hill, said Adrian Feldman. We meditated for about 15 minutes, during which time I had a very strong vision of four-armed Chenrezig and a green lady. At that point, I didn't know about Green Tara at all. I've never had another vision like that one. It just appeared in my mind that Lama was Tara and Rinpoche was Chenrezig. We took the 8 precepts that morning, Nick Rebush recalled. Around 5 p.m., one of the students rushed up to Lama panic-stricken, declaring that she'd mindlessly just eaten an apple in breach of her vow. In breach of her vow to fast after midday. Exuding compassion, Lama took her hand and said, "Don't dwell on the minute you broke the vow, although you can easily purify that. Think of the almost 24 hours you've kept your vows purely and rejoice." Of course, that calmed her down immediately. A couple of days before the course ended, Phra Somde, abbot of Wat Bovanivas, who had offered lunch to the Lamas in Bangkok 2 months earlier, visited the center. He was accompanied by Phra Kantipalo, Ayya Khema, and some Thai monks from Sydney. Lama instructed his students to line up and formally welcome them, while he bounced around with his camera, taking photos and laughing freely, in total contrast to the very sober demeanor of his visitors. The abbot gave a Dharma talk to the Westerners, with Lama Yeshe sitting in the very front row. At the end of the month-long course, 50 people took refuge with Lama Yeshe. Also, 58 received a Chenrezig empowerment from Lama, and 45 received a Tara empowerment from Rinpoche. A number of those who had attended the course planned to do group retreat together, but Adrian Feldman wanted to do retreat alone. I went to Lama to see him in his caravan and told him. He said that was fine, adding, "Whenever a question comes into your mind, I want you to write me a letter." I said, "Okay," even though I knew I was going to be in an extremely remote spot and miles from any letterbox. One of the Lama's last tasks in Queensland was to write to Peter Giuliano in Melbourne, thanking him for his many services. "Dear Peter Giuliano, thank you so much for your giving pure Dharma. As much as possible, practice wisdom light and giving energy to other students. Please write what everyone is doing nowadays. I want to check up your daily life, so report. Keep continuously energetic wisdom bell ringing. Chenrezig Institute is fantastic. See you next year. Psychic kiss. Love, 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 Lama Yeshe." On the way to the airport for their flights to New Zealand, Lama Yeshe stopped to buy an orange plastic mug for everyone at Kopan. "These are very good, dear. Not too hot, not too cold." "These are very good, dear. Not too hot to hold," he said. The Lamas then missed their flight to Sydney. Anila Ann felt sad about the Lama's departure. "Don't you like it here?" asked Lama. "Oh, Lama," said Anne, "you know all I want to do is live in your pocket." Back at Chenrezig, the retreaters settled into a regimen of silence and a diet of macrobiotic food. Lama Yeshe had left a taped message for them, which they played every day. "Good morning, Golden Flower students. Enjoy divine wisdom chanting as much as possible. Cultivate or activate wisdom action and stay in the universal compassion wisdom. Never come down in supermarket. Worthwhile. See you soon in the everlasting peaceful sky. Stay." Such simple words filled their hearts and minds. with more satisfaction than years of formal education ever could. New Zealand. The Lamas, Max and Nick, arrived in Auckland June 4th. On June 7th, the Auckland Herald carried a wonderful portrait of both Lamas on its front page. 250 people attended their public lecture that night, and naturally several questions from the audience concerned supernormal powers. Lama Yeshe responded as follows. The Mahayana Buddhism of Tibet certainly does contain an unbroken oral tradition of teachings on the development of supernormal powers. But just because the teaching exists doesn't mean I have accomplished it. Furthermore, Tibetan Buddhism prohibits any Lama who does have such realizations from proclaiming them. Even when you do attain enlightenment, unless there is a good reason, you are not allowed to go around telling everyone. You don't tell everyone that you're a Buddha. Be careful. Our system is different from yours. In the West, you hear people say, "Last night God spoke to me in my dreams." We think it can be dangerous for people to broadcast details of their mystical experiences, therefore we don't allow it. Someone asked if it would be possible to create one common spiritual society on this planet. Lama answered, "Even if you could, it would not stop people's problems. Even if you made a single society of all the inhabitants of the entire universe, there would still be attachment, there would still be anger, there would still be hunger. Problems lie within each individual. People are not the same. Everybody is different. Each of us needs different methods according to our individual psychological makeup, mental attitudes, and personality. Each of us needs a different approach in order to attain enlightenment. That's why Buddhism completely accepts the existence of other religions and philosophies. We recognize that they are all necessary for human development. You can't say that any one way of thinking is right for everybody. That's just dogma." The Lamas then met with New Zealand's only Tibetan resident. "I had forgotten my Tibetan after not speaking it for 15 years, but we managed to communicate," said Thupten Khersang. The Lamas gave a 2-week course at Waikanai near Wellington. Unfortunately, the naive young students made the same mistake as before. Once again, they housed the Lamas and Mummy Max in caravans, this time parked in a run-down camping ground during a freezing midwinter. Lama Yeshe's caravan even leaked. Nevertheless, even though he succumbed to a heavy cold, Lama never complained. Halfway through the course, Lama Yeshe, accompanied by Nick, flew to Christchurch on the South Island to give a 2-day seminar attended by 35 students and a public lecture to an audience of 150, where he spoke on Buddhist psychology and answered questions such as, "What is the meaning of suffering?" Mental agitation is suffering. Dissatisfaction is suffering. Actually, it is very important to understand the various subtle levels of suffering. Otherwise, people are going to say, "Why does Buddhism say everybody's suffering? I'm happy." When Lord Buddha talked about suffering, he didn't mean just the pain of a wound or the mental anguish we often experience. We say we are happy, but if we check our happiness more closely, we'll find that there is still plenty of dissatisfaction in our minds. From the Buddhist point of view, simply that we cannot control our minds is mental suffering. In fact, that's worse than the various physical sufferings we experience. Buddhist teachings are basically applied psychology. Buddhism teaches the nature of suffering at the mental level and the methods for its eradication. Another person asked Lama Yeshe about wrathful deities. Does Buddhism emphasize evil? Buddhism never emphasizes the existence of external evil. Evil is a projection of your mind. If evil exists, it is within you. There's no outside evil to fear. Wrathful deities are emanations of enlightened wisdom and serve to help people who have a lot of uncontrolled anger. In meditation, the angry person transforms his anger into wisdom, which is then visualized as a wrathful deity. Thus, the energy of his anger is digested by wisdom. Briefly, that's how the method works. American academic Ken Lieberman was living out of the snowfields near Christchurch when he heard about this Tibetan Lama. "I decided to attend the lectures and met Lama Yeshe," Ken recalled. "He was very sick with the flu and running a high fever. He could hardly speak, yet he still taught. One night he said to us, "Tonight you give me teaching," and went from person to person asking them to explain Dharma to him and giving comments in reply. I bought a copy of The Wish-Fulfilling Golden Sun from Nick, but could make neither head nor tail of it. All these goblins being fried in hell. At an interview with Lama, I told him his lectures were the greatest stuff I'd ever heard. There was only one thing wrong. I was a Jew, and Jews don't prostrate to idols, so I couldn't be a Buddhist. "No problem," he said. "Half my students are Jews." I became a Buddhist right then. The weather in Christchurch was so bad that Lama Yeshe's return flight to Wellington was delayed for 24 hours. He spent the day watching the local TV's one channel for 8 hours straight, with Nick sitting at his feet, answering his endless questions. Lama was studying Western culture, and watching TV taught him plenty. Upon returning to Wellington, Lama Yeshe conferred refuge and gave a Chenrezig initiation to the students. Once again, Max gave a talk on how she had become a nun. She and Lama were due to fly out to Hawaii together on June 21, with Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Nick following a few days later. In Auckland, a wonderful long lunch offered by a local Vietnamese woman resulted in Lama missing yet another flight, but no one really minded. The students sat with him at the airport for many hours, as for once he actually had some spare time. Repeat. The students sat with him at the airport for many hours, as for once he actually had some spare time. On the long flight to Hawaii, Lama went up and down the aisles of the plane looking for empty seats where he could lie down. Since he had been ill, flying placed an additional strain on him. "I noticed that Lama was weaker in the morning," said Mummy Max, "but in the evenings he could just go on and on, doing everything under the sun. I'd sit up with him until around midnight, and he'd be wide awake, full of energy, pulling all the strings." In Hawaii, they stayed in a small family hotel and had their own kitchen. Lama didn't like fancy environments. He liked to do his own shopping and cooking so they could just feel at home, said Max. Rinpoche and Nick arrived in Hawaii just after Lama and Max had left for Los Angeles. They stayed at the Arico Foundation's headquarters in Honolulu, where Rinpoche gave a talk on Thursday, June 26, and led a 2-day seminar the following weekend. They flew to Los Angeles on June 29th. The Lake Arrowhead Course. When Lama and Max arrived in Los Angeles on June 25th, they were met by Thupten Wangmo and her photographer friend Carol Witz, now Royce Wilder, who had arranged for them to stay in her relative's big ranch-style house in Tarzana, where they could relax between public lectures. "Lama fit right in," said Carol. "He called my relatives his American family and ended up changing their lives. Lama loved the big clean house, especially the beautiful bathrooms." Thupten Wangmo, previously Feather Mestron, had arrived 5 months earlier to stay with her grandmother in Beverly Hills, where she had grown up. Her father, John, had created and written the TV series Gunsmoke, so the Los Angeles Times did a story on the Hollywood kid turned Buddhist nun. Wangmo brought her beloved grandmother, journalist and friend of Aldous Huxley, Bernadine Souls Fritz, to meet Lama Yeshe. He jumped up from his seat, took her arm, and walked her around the house. Her face was ecstatic, said Wangmo. "I had never seen anyone being so loving and gentle with her." Marvin John Schwartz, a Los Angeles filmmaker, scriptwriter, and producer, had seen the newspaper story on Wangmo and got in touch. When Lama wanted to visit a shopping mall, Wangmo and John Schwartz obliged. "He was buying all this stuff for the boys at Copan," said John, "but it was almost closing time and the staff was asking people to leave. He went out the big glass doors and held them open for the next person and the next, smiling at them all and saying thank you. They looked at him and laughed. Wangmo had shown me a photo of Lama Yeshe before I met him, and I got rushes of energy from it. I didn't know what was happening to me." Lama rested and relaxed for several days. On June 28th, he gave a public lecture entitled "What is Buddhism?" following a film showing at the University Religious Conference in Los Angeles to an audience of 250. The next day, the same program was repeated at Fiesta Hall in Plummer Park to a similarly sized audience, this time Lama's talk being the purpose of meditation. Wang Mo had organized these public lectures to attract more people to the upcoming meditation course, as registration looked like it would not reach the minimum the organizers required. It worked. On Sunday, June 29th, John and Wang Mo went out to the airport to collect Lama, Sopa Rinpoche, and Nick. I couldn't believe the suitcases. They were the heaviest I had ever lifted, said John. They were filled with Tibetan texts. The Lamas were to teach at Camp Arrowpines on Lake Arrowhead, a couple of hours east of Los Angeles. John Schwartz arranged for them to stay in a nearby house belonging to his friend Michael Wayne, son of the famous actor John Wayne. Chuck Thomas, who had been to Copan and had helped care for the Lamas in Wisconsin during the previous year, was appointed attendant. Teresa Knowlton, who had attended the 4th and 6th Copan courses, was their driver. A 3-week course had been organized with an official early finish after the first 2 weeks for those who could not attend the entire course. 100 people attended the first 2 weeks and 60 remained for the 3rd week. During the first 2 weeks of this retreat-style course, Rinpoche covered the basic Lam Rim teachings, but during the last week, coming for only one session a day, he focused his teaching exclusively on the complex topic of emptiness. Lama Yeshe taught much more than usual during this course and gave private interviews to practically every student in attendance. Lama also emphasized the Tantric seed syllable meditation that he had introduced in the Dramana course 3 months earlier. Either Nick or Wang Mo led everyone in this meditation every morning from the very start of the course, and Nick conducted the daily discussion groups. For the last 2 weeks of the course, everyone took the 8 Mahayana precepts every morning before dawn. Lama Yeshe actually gave refuge twice, to 13 people at the early finish 2 weeks into the course, and to 38 people at the end of the course on July 19th. On that day, Lama also gave lay precepts to 20 students, and on the next day, a Chenrezig initiation to 60. In the Tibetan pantheon, each deity or personification of particular aspects of the enlightened mind has an associated mantra, Sanskrit words packed with meaning. In reply to a question about mantra, Lama Yeshe responded that while the common misconception was that reciting mantras In reply to a question about mantra, Lama Yeshe responded that while the common misconception was that reciting mantras is an external and unnatural exercise, rather than an internal and spontaneous occurrence, mantra transcends external sounds and words. It is more like listening to a subtle inner sound that has always inhabited your nervous system, he said. Lama Yeshe on mantra. The existence of inner sound cannot be denied. Our nervous system has its own specific inner sound. This is not something that Mahayanists have invented. It is an objective reality that exists within us. For example, the sound ah exists within us from the moment of birth. All speech sounds are derived from ah. Without ah, there could be no other sound. Mantra becomes more powerful when imparted by a qualified teacher who has deep inner experience of the mantra. A good teacher creates a situation that heightens our receptivity to the wisdom transmitted by the mantra. Mantra is energy. It is always pure and cannot be contaminated by negative thought processes. As mantra is not gross energy, it cannot be corrupted the way sensory phenomena are corrupted by our own minds. Those endowed with skillful wisdom will naturally attain realizations through the power of mantra. Practitioners of mantra yoga will discover that their inner sound becomes completely one with the mantra itself. Then even their normal speech becomes mantra. Seed syllables are a further reduction of such mantras into one intensely meaningful syllable. For example, Tara's mantra is Om Tare Tutare Ture Soha, and her seed syllable is Tam. Such seed syllables are usually visualized in written form in either Western or Tibetan script, at the place of the chakras in the body. Seed syllables may be topped with 3 subtle ciphers, a crescent, a dot, and a tiny flame. One practices visualizing the letters absorbing from the bottom to the top through the two lower ciphers, and into the tiny flame which then dissolves into emptiness. Lama Yeshe taught his students the seed syllable meditation as an illustration of the mechanics of tantric practice, a huge field of study. Teaching such a practice to new students was a radical thing to do, and a measure of Lama Yeshe's extraordinary confidence in them. As detailed above, the basic visualization instructions for what Lama Yeshe called the seed syllable meditation are almost identical to those of the vase breathing meditation described in the previous chapter, the only exception being that just above the mystic point below the navel where the three psychic channels join together, one visualizes inside that juncture a tiny red seed syllable like a red hot glowing ember. The idea is to generate heat from this ember, the inner psychic heat called tumo. As one practices vase breathing, the concentration of breath around the small flame in the central channel brings energy to that point, causing the ember to glow hotter and hotter. This heat is then used to melt the psychic energy contained in the various chakras in the body, thereby generating great bliss throughout the body and mind. One uses this great bliss to cultivate deep concentration and as a powerful tool to further understanding of non-duality or emptiness. Practicing the seed syllable meditation brings one into contact with the inner psychic nervous system, the basic of tantric practice. It was most unusual for such a practice to be taught openly, especially to new Western students, but Lama Yeshe did just that. Lama hadn't even taught the seed syllable meditation to the Sangha yet, but he knew the American attitude was, "Show me, prove it," said John Schwartz. Lama Zopa had us all dissolving our bodies on our pillows, melting down all the atoms until there was nothing left. He told us how to see the atoms in the wall and to put our finger through it. He described all this in such incredible detail that everyone was just blown away. Lama Yeshe usually kept out of sight during courses taught by Rinpoche, but in this instance, the American students were becoming so emotional that he came every second night just to calm them down. Carol Fields had come down from Berkeley, but she wasn't having much fun. I couldn't eat and got only about 4 hours sleep a night. I had to leave the course early, so Lama gave refuge to me and another student together. I was filled with tenderness for everybody for about 6 months, said Carol. Carol Royce Wilder took dozens of wonderful photos of the Lama's teaching. One day, seemingly inconsolable and feeling desperately depressed, she burst in on Lama, sobbing hysterically. Her eyes widened and he looked very concerned. I just blubbered out of control, a real spectacle, Carol recalled. "What is it, dear?" he asked, taking my hands in his and drawing me close to him. Looking around, he found flowers someone had given him and said, "Here, dear, these are for you." I said, No, Lama, it's me who should be offering them to you." He handed me some fruit and said to take it too. "No, Lama, you don't understand. Nothing helps. Not fruit, not flowers, it's useless. I'm totally isolated and alone. I can't feel anything. I'm dead. Nothing means anything to me, not even you, Lama." I shrieked and sobbed. He said, "Not even me? Impossible, impossible." Then he opened his eyes very wide and drew my eyes to his, and what felt like my whole being went somewhere. I don't have the words to describe what happened. I felt like he took me into the deepest recesses of his being, and I knew that there was nothing there, absolutely nothing at all. There was just an empty silence, a black hole. There was simply no person called Lama inside. It was awesome. In that moment I realized that the friendly, smiling, personable Lama Yeshe I knew was a figment, a persona he created solely for our benefit, that behind the charismatic exterior lay unbounded empty space. Lama had allowed me to catch a glimpse of that for one brief but eternal moment. When I emerged from this indescribable experience, he said, "Well, dear, we'll talk again. Now you go back to the course." Later I took the Lamas to see the movie Earthquake. I was terrified. "It's only a movie, dear," said Lama. Red Miller Moasanin was struck by how similar the teachings were to those of Carl Jung. When I told Lama I couldn't recall past lives, he said that if one goes further and further back, one slowly remembers them. Red Miller recounted, one night he demonstrated attachment to one person by squeezing me so hard I couldn't help but make the face of someone whose freedom had been removed. You see, he said. One day Nick found out that the students had sent a small delegation to Lama to complain about the way he was leading the meditations and discussion groups. I was working hard, doing my best, and I felt a bit sorry for myself when I heard that, he said. So I went to Lama to complain about the complainers. Never mind, Lama told me. Yesterday they were here complaining about Lama Zopa, so I felt a bit vindicated by that. Then he added, these people, they have no idea how far Lama Zopa has to come down to communicate with them. Lama Yeshe had private interviews with almost everyone who attended the course. Later he remarked that every female who came to see him had promptly burst into tears. One evening he sat with 5 women, Tupta Rongmo, Pam Cohen, Lois Greenwood, Meredith Hassan, Linda Millsbow, and 2 men, Nick Rebush and Dick Robinson, and discussed the possibility of holding a special course for women. They deliberated at length about what to call it. Clearly, it had to be differentiated from the politically motivated women's movement. Every time the words women's liberation were mentioned in America, a dozen conflicting voices rose in clamor. Women's meditation course for inner development was their best shot. The males present said there should also be a special course for men. Lama Yeshe agreed, but for him, teaching women how to use their energy appeared to be a priority. Some of Lama Yeshe's comments during that conversation. I think the idea of women's inner liberation is good. Women need liberation, I agree, but I disagree with the way of a few women and the methods of women's liberation. To my understanding, a woman trying to be liberated should be working to become truly independent. She should cease to be weak physically and mentally. She should not be relying on the existence of one man. This misconception has long polluted women's minds. What's going on is not truly women's liberation. Men can do without dependence on women and live freely without being weak, but they should also strive to be mentally free and without insecure feelings. The women who are searching for liberation, their minds are totally insecure too. They are not truly looking for women's liberation. Searching is okay, but they are seeking the wrong places. Women have a particular mind. Women have particular conceptions regarding the meaning of man and woman in the world, and from these come specific notions about how to deal with men. These fixed ideas, woman means this, man means that, which are mistaken, are the source of many problems between the sexes. These ideas obscure a true knowledge of the reality of female energy, the reality of male energy, and how they truly function. This knowledge brings a remarkable emotional release. This freedom from such emotionally fixed ideas makes it possible for a woman to relate better to herself, her own energy, free of misconceptions and misinterpretations. Since the beginning of this earth until now, both women's and men's usual interpretations of woman has been absolutely wrong on both sides. Therefore, relationships between men and women have been wrong all along, because such relationships are not actually found in the interpretations. In reality, men and women can basically do what each other can, but men generally think that they run the world, and so they create an hallucinated painting of reality like this. And women believe it. Because men think they run the world, they also think that women are nothing. And again, women believe them. Many women think that men will lead and they can just, help. That's all. But that's not true. Not at all. Without women in the world, men would go crazy, absolutely crazy. Women need to understand this. Without the support of women, ordinary men would be almost non-existent, unable to have a life. Of course, here I'm speaking relatively. This is why I think female energy is very interesting. Understanding female energy can give women more strength and help them to become independent and free. You understand what I mean? I can actually completely release that feeling of insecurity that can come when a woman feels that she can't have a life unless she has a man to lead her life for her. Many women carry, I think, misconceptions about themselves that contribute to a sense of weakness. This definitely doesn't serve their liberation. These misconceptions are only words, but because they believe they are in a weak position when they don't believe in the reality of their positive strength. So I think that to organize this course would be very worthwhile. In the end, this special course for women never happened. There were many discussions during the Lake Arrowhead course about establishing a center in California. After dinner one night, Lama Yeshe sketched out a plan on a paper napkin and spoke to the students about his vision of what the land might look like. About 250 acres with a hill in the middle. The Gompa was situated at the top of the hill with the Sangha living close by. At the base of the hill lived the lay community with a school, gardens, craft shops, everything necessary for community life. He even gave the center its name, Vajrapani Institute for Wisdom Culture. In the meantime, however, the center was first located in the Venice, California home of Dick Robinson, Vajrapani's first director, and his wife Meredith. The couple, together with Sharon and Lois Gross, all four of them Copan students, later moved to Santa Barbara, where they shared a house designated as a new Vajrapani Institute location. They invited Dharma teachers and organized courses and evening meditation sessions, all for the purpose of furthering the development of Vajrapani Institute. Chuck Thomas and John and Elaine Jackson, who would all become important Vajrapani members in the future, were there to help. The Jacksons first encountered the Dharma during these months in Santa Barbara. The Santa Barbara Vajrapani house only lasted about 6 months, after which Dick and Meredith returned to Venice and Sharon and Lewis to Berkeley, where they all continued to organize Dharma activities under the Vajrapani name. The Indiana Course. From California, the Lamas went to Louis Bob Wood's Bodhicitta Center in Indiana, Max, Nick, and Wong Mo accompanying them. They were scheduled to give a 2-week course there starting July 24th. This time, Louis Bob had rented a venue, the Abe Martin Lodge in beautiful Brown County State Park. And once again, many of those attending were older people, mostly devout Christians and definitely not hippies. In addition to the local attendees, there were also about 20 people who had already received teachings from the Lamas. While in California, Lama Zopa Rinpoche had dictated the yoga meditation of Chenrezig Compassionate Wisdom to Wangmo, who then arranged to have it printed in time for a Chenrezig initiation Lama gave to 85 people at the end of the course. Rinpoche signed the booklet Zopa Lama in name only. During the question and answer time, a woman asked Lama if Buddha's ultimate nature was the same as God. Lama paused in deep contemplation for a long minute before clearly replying, yes. As most of those attending this course were Christians, Lama spoke often about Jesus and his qualities, and even had them visualizing Jesus instead of Buddha. 200 people attended Lama Yeshe's public talk at the Brown County Art Gallery on the second night of the course. At the end of the course, Lama gave refuge to 40 people and lay vows to 30. Lama told all the people who wanted to do further study to visit Geshe Zopa in Madison, Wisconsin. Several of them went directly there and became dedicated students of Lama's longtime teacher. Max Matthews stayed on the tour for the duration of her school holiday leave. In Nashville, Indiana, she spent time working on an innovative education project that Lama had discussed with her. Lama had told her he believed Buddhism could be taught all around the world without using any Buddhist terms at all, and in such a way that children could learn that life is impermanent, all things are interrelated, and the path to life's fulfillment involves exercising compassion and wisdom and applying appropriate methods. Max thought the first thing to do was to prepare texts in order to be able to train teachers. She wrote out a program, developed concepts, and had long discussions with Lama. News of her work elicited offers from 2 American universities to complete a PhD in educational research, but she did not accept. When the Lamas left for Wisconsin, Max returned to Nepal and her job at Lincoln School. She was still the only source of support for more than 50 young Mount Everest Center monks. In Wisconsin with Geshe Zopa. Several days into the Indiana course on July 29th, because of difficulties with his health due to the summer heat, Lama Yeshe cancelled the upcoming course in New York that had been organized by Roger Jackson and Pam Percy with help of Nicole Couture. He was obviously not well, said Pam. He paused every now and then as some pain passed through him, but he was more concerned about us. He wouldn't let us leave until we were quite clear on his reasons for cancelling the New York course. He kept asking us to take care of each other. The upside of this was that it gave Lamas more time to spend with their precious teacher, Geshe Zopa. They traveled to Madison, Wisconsin, directly from Indiana, spending the next month there receiving teachings from Geshe Zopa on the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment. It was also a time for Lama Yeshe to take a break from his grueling schedule and escape from the heat that oppressed him so. Because Geshe Zopa's house was right next to Lake Mendota, it was more comfortable in the summer than much of the rest of the area. Kamlung Rinpoche, whose house was just down the road, hadn't seen Thupten Yeshe since that dreadful day at Sera in March 1959. Here in the United States, the Tibetans spent long, pleasant evenings dining together, Lama Yeshe doing some of the cooking. Geshe Zopa was teaching only one weekly class at the time, so he had free time to spend with his old student. Meanwhile, Nick embarked on a series of long bus and plane rides to Chicago, Boston, Toronto, and Gainesville, Florida, giving talks on Buddhism to raise funds for the IMI before returning to Madison. Alan Roberts was a psychologist and the director of one of Wisconsin's first private clinics. In 1972, his friend Geshe Zopa had asked him to deliver a message to Lama Yeshe while he was traveling in India. He had been warmly welcomed by Lama, and the two enjoyed many enthusiastic conversations about the overlap of Buddhism and Western psychology in relieving suffering. They agreed that each discipline needed to learn from and be complemented by the other. Lama asked Alan to send him some suitable books written by Western psychologists, which he had done. Lama even suggested that they swap roles for a few months. These conversations had taken place even before the term transpersonal psychology entered the vernacular, and a time when Western psychological traditions rarely focused on spiritual dimensions in their pursuit of wholeness. Alan heard that after spending time at Copan, many young drug addicts had been able to kick their addiction, while in contrast, clinical approaches were having only limited success. He wanted to know how they did it. That's easy, Lama Yeshe had told him. They are hungry for nourishing food. I feed them, and then it is easier for them to forgo the non-nourishing food. Now that Lama was visiting Madison, Geshe Zopa called Alan, saying that Lama wanted to come and see him. Geshe-la wanted Lama to see the silo that was attached to my home, on top of which I had built a glass-walled viewing room. Alan recalled, Lama arrived and darted up the inner staircase leading to the room. Geshe-la wanted Lama to see the silo that was attached to my home, on top of which I had built a glass-walled viewing room, Alan recalled. Lama arrived and darted up the inner staircase leading to the room. Geshe-la was anxious because he knew of Lama's heart condition. Halfway up, he looked back at Geshe-la and me in a laughing and mischievous way. I'm fine, Lama said. We followed at a much less vigorous pace. In the viewing room, Lama was absolutely overjoyed. He said, this gives me an idea. We should build a statue of the Buddha like this, with an inner staircase surrounded by Buddhist and spiritual art objects. He said our energy and spirits were raised in the process of climbing up, and most people needed some kind of physical experience. People would take with them memories and images that would assist their spiritual growth. Some of Lama Yeshe's students had written to Geshe Zopa, hoping he could persuade Lama to undergo the heart valve replacement recommended by several cardiologists. They had also written to Kyabje Trichang Rinpoche about it. However, Trichang Rinpoche told Lama that his divinations advised against having any operation at all. Nevertheless, Lama, now 40 years old, went back to the university hospital for more tests. While he was at the hospital, a vending machine there attracted his attention. So beautiful, just like karma. You select something, put a coin in, and the result appears, he said. The upshot of this visit was that Lama agreed to be admitted for 2 days to have a cardiac catheterization. It was noted in the hospital documents that his date of birth, invented by Mummy Max for Lama's travel documents, was 21st of May 1935, that he was 5 foot 3 inches tall and weighed 155 pounds. The procedure was performed under a local anesthetic on September 10th. They took me to that chopping place and put me on a chopping table. They showed me on TV. I could watch like a movie, said Lama afterward. He had not been at all nervous and joked cheerfully all the way through the procedure. The doctors were impressed. Before leaving Geshe Zopa's house for the hospital, Lama Yeshe gave his teacher an envelope containing some money and his will. It seemed he had already decided that it didn't matter if he died during the operation. Of course, once you decide that, there is no problem, said Geshe Zopa. Dr. Nick attended the post-examination medical conference. The doctors couldn't understand how Lama could travel and be so active with his heart in such poor condition. One of them pointed out that he was a Buddhist monk and probably led a very sedentary life, so I was prompted to tell them how just last year he had scooted up the hill at Laudo, which is at 14,000 feet, faster than I did. I'm not sure they believed me. A monk wasn't going to have the same credibility as a doctor. And a doctor monk, well, whenever any of us students asked Lama how he coped with his heart, he always said it was the power of mantra. I didn't tell them that. Geshe Zopa also attended this conference. The doctor was very frank. He insisted that it was better to do the operation now. Otherwise, if we were to wait, his heart would deteriorate and it could be very dangerous. Right then, it was not so dangerous. I pushed him to say how long he thought Lama could live without an operation. He said 8 years, said Geshe Zopa. But later, Lama repeated Trijang Rinpoche's advice not to have the surgery. If we followed the doctors, then I would already be dead. Several doctors said I should be dead. I don't want to do that operation now. Maybe later I can come back. I've stayed alive a lot longer than anyone thought I could, and I have so much to do. I can't afford the recovery time an operation would take. Lama's friend Chombi also recalled discussing the matter with him. Lama said Trijang Rinpoche told him not to have it because it wouldn't make any big difference. The operation would not prolong his life, and not having it would not shorten his life either. But Trijang Rinpoche also made a promise to Lama. He told him, as long as I live, you'll be taken care of. Nothing will happen to you. I can't do much in spreading the Dharma around you, and you are doing all that work. I'll look after you while I live. That's what he told Lama, said Chombi. The Lama's first visit to England. The Lamas and Nick flew to New York on September 14th and rested in a hotel before their evening flight to London. Luckily, there were plenty of empty seats and Lama was able to lie down and get some badly needed sleep between New York and London. He was definitely not well. He had been very ill in New Zealand, had recovered somewhat in California, become weak again in Indiana, and better in Madison. But the catheterization had been an additional strain. The Lama's first visit to the United Kingdom came 2 years after His Holiness the Dalai Lama's first visit to Europe in 1973. In England's green and pleasant land, Peter Kedge and Harvey Horrocks had rented the Maple Durham Watermill, a restful little house on a mill stream near Reading. It was there that Lama Zopa Rinpoche's long-time benefactor Audrey Cohen met him for the first time. I had actually seen Lama Yeshe buying fruit in the local shops that day. When I finally met them, I thought Rinpoche was the boss and Lama as his attendant who did his shopping. Lama Zopa Rinpoche had once sent Audrey a photo of a group of monks without identifying Lama Yeshe. Audrey had written back saying she got a very good feeling from a particular monk in the back row. It was Lama Yeshe. Audrey attended just one of Rinpoche's lectures in England, after which she took him to task over his English pronunciation. I could not understand a word he said, she reported rather gleefully. When Rinpoche was small, she had corrected the letters he had written to her and then mailed them back to him so he could learn from his mistakes. I saw Rinpoche with Audrey Cohen in later years, said Thupten Pemo. Her relationship with him was quite different from our guru-disciple relationships. She ordered him around and told him what to do, loudly and clearly. Rinpoche would reply, "Yes, mother, yes, mother." It was a mother-son relationship. Audrey Cohen remained Rinpoche's perfect Jewish mother all her life. She never ceased helping and caring for him. At a lecture in Kensington Town Hall, Lama Yeshe again told his audience that Lobsang Rampa's stories of drilling holes in people's heads to create a third eye had nothing to do with actual insights. Afterward, Nick and the two lamas dined at a local Thai restaurant. They were a little surprised to see Buddhist monks eating in the evening. The owners refused to let them pay for the meal. A weekend residential seminar in Royal Holloway College in Egham, Surrey followed. Establishing a new centre in England. Peter Kedge and Harvey Horrocks were well on their way to establishing an English centre. Peter had already proposed the name Manjushri Institute for Wisdom Culture, and Lama Yeshe had given his consent. Peter's hard-working Anglican parents were somewhat surprised by how much he'd changed, but they respected his intelligence and knew he thought through whatever he was doing. They had lunch with the lamas at Reading and already knew Harvey well from Peter's Rolls-Royce aeronautical days. Meanwhile, their highly educated son was now driving a taxi to support himself and pay the costs associated with his and Harvey's hard work trying to establish a centre. The lamas arrived in England at a very appropriate stage of this process. During his first trip to England, Peter spoke to Lama Yeshe over the phone for the first time. It was strange because I remember thinking I should prostrate in his presence, said Peter. The technological revolution just beginning in the West had not come anywhere near Nepal. Neither Copan nor Tushita Retreat Center had a telephone, so any urgent communication took place either in person or by telegram. In the early days of Copan, there had been no electricity, no reel-to-reel tape recorders, and no running water. There was a time when it was almost impossible to make an international telephone call from the telegraph office in Kathmandu. Peter continued, recalling. In 1974, I remember spending 2 full days in Kathmandu trying to get a line to England. Delhi was easier. If it was a clear night without wind, one could make a call to England from the Parliament Street telegraph office. But it wasn't easy. It was a totally different world. 30 years later, we can download Lamrim teachings and commentaries off the internet in any language instantaneously. This is a far cry from what the few cherished publications from the Tibetan library available then. In those days, we studied the perfect human rebirth. Now we need a perfect human e-birth. Today, the end of the seminar at Royal Holloway College. Repeat. Toward the end of the seminar at Royal Holloway College, Lama Yeshe gave the oral transmission of the mantra of Manjushri, Om Arapasana Di. An oral transmission gives students permission to do the practice or recite the mantra that is transmitted. At the seminar's conclusion, Peter and Harvey showed everyone slides of several promising properties they had seen during inspection trips in the Lake District, Wales and Scotland. One property they particularly liked, though Lama liked it less, was Bardsey Island off the Welsh coast. I was at that course, Adele Hulse recalled. I also attended a meeting of the Lamas or Copan students that Peter and Harvey held in a London pub. From Nepal, I travelled overland to Europe and was working in London at the time as a gardener. One of my clients, the Honourable Michael Pearson, happened to own Bardsley Island. I could see how busy Lama Yeshe was and how people pressed him for even a moment of his time. He saw me in the crowd and grinned. That was more than enough for me. Even photos of Lama satisfied me. He filled me right up, and I was not hungry for him. But I stopped him on the path one day and told him I worked for this guy. He smiled at me gently and said, "Yes, dear, I know that." How did he know? Michael Pearson would eventually become a significant benefactor to various Tibetan causes. Unexpectedly, Lama Yeshe instructed Peter and Harvey to go back and take another look at the site that Bob Kedge, Peter's father, a town planner, had discovered through a colleague, the district surveyor of Birmingham, who had helped by providing a list of district surveyors throughout England. Peter contacted most of them to see if their regions had properties to dispose of. The district surveyor in Cumbria responded with a suggestion to contact the then owner of Conisset Priory, Ulverston, because he knew he was trying to sell it. The priory was a massive Gothic stone building with more than 100 rooms on 70 acres, located just south of the Lake District in northwestern England in Morecambe Bay. During their stay in Reading, the Lamas invited an old friend from Buxar to lunch at the Mill College. No longer a monk, Geshe Tsotum Gyaltsen was now married and working as a male nurse in a psychiatric hospital. Few realized that this quiet man with long hair was a Laramba Geshe. During their Geshe exams, Geshe Gyaltsen and Geshe Zopa had both been at the top of their respective classes in the same year. Geshe Gyaltsen cooked an enormous stack of momos for Lama Yeshe and Rinpoche. Over lunch, Lama asked him if he would consider teaching the group of students in the early stages of creating Manjushri Institute. After this meeting with Geshe Gyaltsen, Lama was incredibly moved and full of compassion for him, said Peter Kedge. From Lama's perception, Geshe-la had an extremely difficult life, and Lama wanted him to be able to use his enormous potential. To help Geshe-la make the transition back to being a teacher, Lama went out shopping in London and bought some gold-coloured brocade. He instructed me to have this made into a full-length tunic-like robe for Geshe Gyaltsen. I was to offer it to him from Lama and to request Geshe-la to wear it whenever he taught. Geshe Gyaltsen accepted the gift and wore the robe. Geshe Gyaltsen later left England for Los Angeles, where he eventually taught the first official meditation course, organized by the students of the newly founded Vajrapani Institute for Wisdom Culture. When we left Reading, I had to settle accounts with the owner of the watermill, who hadn't actually seen who was staying there, said Peter Kedge. Of course, we kept it beautifully with flowers and altars and so forth, but the owner complained bitterly that the place stank of those filthy Spanish cigarettes. In actuality, it was the incense that had been kept burning all the time. Les Bayards, Switzerland. On September 24th, 3 days after the seminar at Royal Holloway in Surrey, England, the Lamas and Nick flew from London to Geneva. Chris and Barbara Vortier, two of the organizers of the upcoming 2-week course, met them at the airport and drove them to the picture postcard village of Les Bayards, and about an hour and a half's drive north. The Lamas had been invited to Switzerland by the Vortiers and Jamie and Isabel Johnson. The Vortiers rented a beautiful spick-and-span house for the Lamas in the countryside, about 20 minutes from Les Bayards. Chris and Barbara, who had attended the third Copan course in 1972, were interested in establishing a center in Switzerland, which already had a strong Tibetan community. Geshe Rabten, attended by Gonsid Rinpoche, had arrived there in 1974 to take up a 3-year post as abbot of the Tibet Institute in Rikon, Switzerland. In view of this, Lama Yeshe told Peter Kedge he could not possibly consider opening a center in Switzerland, so that would have been arrogant and disrespectful to Geshe Rabten. The day after they arrived in Switzerland, which was also the first day of the course, the Lamas went to visit Geshe Rabten at the Tibet Institute, leaving behind a slightly miffed Nick to look after the students. They also visited Kyabshi Trichang Rinpoche, who was staying close by. During that visit, Lama Yeshe asked Trichang Rinpoche to record some advice for the 120 students at Les Bayards on a cassette tape. Owe Del Banco, who had not seen the Lamas for 2 years, came to cook for them. I drove them back and forth to the teachings, he said. Whenever we arrived for the teachings or left afterward, students ran out to surround the car. Bent over in devotion, they all rushed to be the one to open the car door. Once Lama Yeshe exclaimed, "Oh, this guru business," as if to say, why can't they just relax and be natural? Lama was so sweet to me then, but he treated Lama Zopa like a little boy. There was a lot of, "What are you doing? Do this, do that." Copan students from all over Europe were thrilled to meet each other again. For many of us, it was the first time we had seen the lamas and each other for years, and it presaged great things to come. After this, new centers began opening all over the continent, said Paula Device. In charge of the kitchen during the course was Patricia Zen, who had been at the 7th course and would later come to be known as Bhikshuni Karma Lekshe Somo, a founder of Shakya Dita, the International Association of Buddhist Women, and a professor of Buddhist Studies at the University of California, San Diego. The students took the 8 Mahayana precepts every morning during the 2nd week of the course. This was challenging, so Lama Yeshe came along to give everyone courage. Good morning. We are here to engage in this exercise, to concentrate on our own beliefs. Perhaps I will explain a little why we do this. It is very simple. We have tremendous uncontrolled energy from our previous experiences, both physical and mental. This energy exerts great influence on us so that when we try to engage in actions that put our energy in the right direction, we need to overcome the garbage energy that has been uncontrollably occupying our minds for so long. In order to actualize the Hinayana path, the Paramitayana path, or even the Tantrayana path, it is necessary to eliminate that uncontrolled negative energy that we are all too familiar with. But we cannot do this merely intellectually. This is like feeling hungry but then denying that you have a stomach. You understand? You cannot just say, I want to stop, and expect it to happen. You have to understand that your mind is like a baby. You have to concentrate this positive energy into your own movement reality, your own coming and going, so that the mind automatically integrates one-pointedly and stops the mundane worldly thoughts. Lama always said he never rehearsed his talks and never knew what he was going to say until he sat on the throne. As the attendant, Nick was in charge of all the mundane matters, such as seeing that everything ran to schedule, especially lunch. On the days when everyone took precepts, lunch was the only meal of the day and was supposed to be over by noon. Lama often lectured in the morning on those days, and his lectures frequently went over time. With 5 minutes to spare, Nick would discreetly remind Lama of the time. 20 minutes later, he often had to do so again, because Lama had taken no notice. One day, after Nick's 3rd interruption, Lama Yeshe rounded on him and said, "In Tibet, when someone is being a nuisance, we do this to them." He made a squishing gesture with his thumb while everybody laughed. Humiliated, Nick stayed quiet. When the lecture was finally over, I led Lama out of the gompa down the stairs, said Nick. My mind was about to boil over. When I got to the first landing, I turned to give Lama a piece of my mind. As I did, he gave me a look full of fear for the karma I was recreating and my future lives and said, "Don't say a thing," and continued down to where Babaji was waiting with the car. Displaying anger toward one's guru creates very bad karma. As promised, Judy Weitzner had turned up in England, where the Tibetan organization Lama had been discussing with her received its name, the International Society for Tibetan Reality. At one point, I said to Lama, "Why stop at International Society for Tibetan Reality? Why not intergalactic?" Lama thought that was a great idea. He said he also wanted to start a university in Lhasa for the academic study of Buddhism, with other subjects taught by volunteers from the West, said Judy, who followed Lama to Les Bayards, where she posted her first recruitment flyer on the course bulletin board. It read, "The International Society for Tibetan Reality is being organized at the request of Lama Thupten Yeshe. It will be concerned with 1. Collecting material about Tibetan culture, books, a film library, and photographs. 2. Encouraging the writing of books and the making of films about Tibetan culture in order to educate the people of the world about the true situation of Tibetans. We need members who are interested in working on various projects. We welcome your ideas and suggestions and would appreciate leads to scholars producing material on Tibet." A later flyer included a list of cultural activities such as celebrating Tibetan holidays, the compilation of a bibliography, and film catalogue of current material, the presentation of representatives of Tibetan culture, maintaining a press file, and responding to misrepresentations in the media. Back in Berkeley, California, Judy gathered together a group. We were lucky to recruit 3 journalists, some political activists, and Dharma students, and were fortunate that Dawa Nobu, a Tibetan scholar and intellectual, was in Berkeley for his doctoral studies, she said. Lama wanted to do as much as he could for Tibet, said Peter Gedge. He cared deeply about Tibet and never missed an opportunity to educate people and further the cause of truth and justice for Tibet and to help Tibetans in any way he could. I wrote many letters for him in relation to what he called his Tibet Reality Project. Adele Hulse also attended the Swiss course. I followed the tour to Les Bayards and was the only other Australian there besides Nick, recalled Adele. Every evening there were discussions conducted in several language groups. I walked around from group to group, not quite belonging. I saw that the French all spoke at once. The Germans made lists of words. The English were super polite and said nothing, and the Italians were extremely emotional. I thought it very funny. Nick invited me to come over to the Lama's house and clean up in readiness for a short visit from Geshe Rupton. Naturally, I was thrilled. The house had been squeaky Swiss clean before the Lamas moved in, but now it was untidy and the kitchen was a mess. There were splotches and burn marks on practically every surface. The Lamas had just finished cooking a mountain of momos for Geshe Rupton, and I was washing up my hands in the sink. I didn't notice Lama Yeshe come up behind me until I suddenly felt his massive thump square in the middle of my back. I was stunned. It was obviously a precise strike and delivered in neither fun nor anger. In my straightforward Australian way, I turned to look at him. His eyes were rolled right back in his head, his hands folded, and he just kept saying, "Thank you, dear. Thank you, dear." I didn't understand at all and just went on with the dishes. That day, Lama asked me, "Why do you stay in London for so long, such a dirty place? Why don't you go back to Australia? A clean place and such good food. See your mummy." Soon afterward, I left Switzerland, knowing my time on the road was up. 2 days before the end of the course, Lama Yeshe gave a public talk at nearby Chaux de Fonds, translated by the Swiss scholar Georges Driesen. On the last day of the course, Geshe Rupton gave a talk, and Sopa Rinpoche gave a Tara initiation. Lama Yeshe also gave a Chenrezig initiation and played Kyabche Trichang Rinpoche's recorded advice to the students, which was translated by the American monk Alan Wallace. The first Italian course. The Lamas enjoyed 2 days' rest before Massimo Corona's brother Luca drove them for 7 hours through a heavy snowstorm to their next appointment, a week-long course in Nubilio near Como, in northern Italy. Massimo, his wife Carol, Claudio Cibulo, and Piero Cherry had arranged everything. The venue was a Catholic retreat center overlooking a pristine lake that reflected the peaks of the nearby Alps. It was run by priests and nuns of the Barnabite order. Accommodation for the 80 students was excellent, and the nuns ran a vegetarian kitchen with the help of volunteers. Piero taught for the first 2 days. The Lamas then gave teachings in English, which were simultaneously translated into both French and Italian. The weather in Nubilio was milder than in Switzerland, but Lama Yeshe was still not well. Those students closest to him sensed this when, during his first lecture, he sat with his eyes closed and silently meditated for several minutes. He was gathering his forces. When he opened his eyes again, his whole being radiated energy. One day, a very rich, elderly Italian man turned up to see the Lamas. He lived alone and had no friends, and had been held for ransom by thugs who had tied him to a chair and ordered him to hand over money at gunpoint. Luckily, a neighbor had heard the racket and called the police. His attackers fled, but the gentleman had continued to receive calls demanding that he leave money in a certain place or else he would be killed. Lama asked Piero to see if he could help the man. Some years later, Lama Yeshe invited him to come and live in peace at Copan, rather than being alone and afraid. Piero traveled with him to Nepal, where he moved into Steve's tower. but he didn't like it there and left after 5 days. He was never seen or heard of again. The lamas ate their meals with the Italian priests who liked their red wine. Lama Yeshe politely refused it. One afternoon he asked Massimo to accompany him to the kitchens to translate his thanks to the nuns for providing such marvelous food. "I think you made a worthwhile choice," he told them. "All the other women got married with ordinary men, but you got married with Christ. You made the right choice." The Catholic community felt great affection for their Tibetan guests. The penultimate day of the course fell on a Sunday. Mass was held in the chapel and attended by all the priests and nuns, a number of villagers, and on Lama's instructions, everyone from the course. The two lamas sat in the front row between Massimo and Piero, who explained what was taking place. Communion was handed out in the modern style, with communicants approaching the altar and taking sacramental bread in their fingers. Piero explained the Eucharist to Lama, who got up and approached the altar. Facing the congregation, he held the host aloft for a few moments, then reverently swallowed it. Rinpoche did likewise, after which the students, many of whom were lapsed Catholics, joined the queue and reverently took communion as well. Many students said later that the ceremony felt like a reconciliation between their past and present spiritual habits. None of the priests raised the slightest objection. The course finished on October 20th. The 8 Mahayana precepts were given before dawn, and this was followed by a ceremony in which 30 people took refuge. The students also received an oral transmission of the name mantra of Lama Tsongkhapa. As everyone emerged into the lovely garden, they were greeted by a marvelous sunrise that seemed to light the whole universe. Massimo's parents, the Coronas, were marginal Catholics. Wilma Corona had attended the Upilio course and enjoyed it. When Lama Yeshe came to say goodbye, he took her in his arms and gave her a kiss right on the lips. She just dissolved. She was in love with him for a week and kept saying, "What a man, what a man." "I was shocked," said Massimo. That evening, the Lamas and Nick drove to Milan, where they caught a flight to Rome, arriving there fairly late in the evening. They were due to fly to Delhi the very next evening. Piero and Claudio had arranged a tiny apartment that included a room for each of the Lamas and a space in the corridor for Nick. After getting the Lamas settled, Piero went out to get food for dinner and brought back a whole cooked chicken. "I watched Lama cut the bird open," said Nick. "He gently parted the flesh with a knife and fork, and with a look of great compassion on his face said, 'So much suffering,' and pushed the plate away." Lama generally ate meat. He liked mulligatawny soup with little bits of meat at the bottom and often ordered it in hotels, but an entire creature was just too much for him. The next day they visited St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, where they meditated quietly until it was time to go to the airport. Between them, the three travelers had about 90 pounds of overweight luggage, and their hand luggage was entirely filled with Tibetan texts. "We were incredibly late for that flight," recounted Nick. "There was just minutes to spare to reach the plane. We had to traverse endless corridors carrying this heavy luggage. Lama couldn't carry anything. He couldn't take the strain. I was totally overloaded, and thin little Rinpoche was trying to figure out how to carry this huge bag I'd given him. I will never forget the sight of him struggling to get it onto his shoulders as I pushed past, terrified the plane was going to leave without us. By the time we got on board, all I wanted to do was sleep, but Rinpoche wanted to translate the 8 verses of thought transformation and create his little sadhana, the ever-flowing nectar of bodhicitta. So we finished up working all the way to India." Lama Yeshe's sister. When the Lamas and Nick reached Delhi, they stayed overnight with Danielle Rauch, a student of Domo Geshe Rinpoche. Lama's sister Chösum came to visit them at the same time as Lisa Kolb, Chodak's wife. Lisa observed the interactions between the two siblings with amazement. Later she told Lama, "When you left the room, she went through your suitcases and put a whole lot of stuff in her bag. She even went through your money, Lama." Lama Yeshe had already given his sister many gifts, so when her back was turned, he went through her bag and retrieved some of what she had filched through, though not everything. My sister has an incredible way of doing things. We do not always get along together. When she makes a problem for me, I go, tuck, 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 he told Lisa, making a gesture of admonishment. I don't like to go to her place either. If I do go, I stay 1 hour, drink tea, then I'm going. I have my own life. I tell her I want very much to be in Nepal for Losar. Achala says no. She wants to possess me. But she loves you, countered Lisa. Yes, maybe, said Lama. Also, she is your benefactor, Lisa added. Oh, yes, she takes care completely. She takes total responsibility. So that means you have responsibility too, Lama, Lisa ventured. Well, said Lama, for food purpose, does someone control me? If somebody steals my stomach, then they can control me? But you're a Lama, said Lisa. You do take care of people who take care of you. Yeah, but that's different. People who take care of me is about more than food. His sister's big complaint was that Lama Yeshe spent too much time with the wild Ingis and had not completed his Geshe degree. Yes, I am a Tibetan hippie. I dropped out, he teased. She could only grumble. The following day, the Lamas left for Dharamsala. Lama Yeshe wanted to present his tour report to His Holiness the Dalai Lama as soon as possible. Miracle at Mullumbimby, Australia. That same day, 24th of October, 1975, was engraved forever in the minds of Australian students Gloria and Bill Searle. At the fourth Copan course, Lama Yeshe had paid considerable attention to their small son Adam and warned them at the time that the child was reckless. Gloria and Bill lived on a small farm in Mullumbimby, New South Wales, prime hippie country. On that October day, Adam, then 6 years old, was playing with his little friend Jason at the edge of a dam on the property. Bill was working in the herb garden just below it. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, recalled Bill Searle. Adam and Jason were chasing dragonflies around the dam and nagging me to take them to the beach. Suddenly I heard Jason yell, "Come back, Adam!" Something in the tone of his voice made me climb up there. Jason was standing knee-deep in this thick brown water, pointing to a flat, empty space. I remember thinking very strongly that I just didn't want to acknowledge this. I just wanted to walk away, pretend it wasn't happening. But I stripped off and jumped in. I swam up and down that dam for I don't know how long. Twice I had to crawl out and vomit up all the filthy brown water I'd swallowed. Little Jason just stood there mute. Then I found Adam face down in the mud under 10 feet of icy cold water. I got hold of him, but his little body slipped out of my grasp before I could say. Repeat. I remember thinking very strongly that I just didn't want to acknowledge this. I just wanted to walk away, pretend it wasn't happening. But I stripped off and jumped in. I swam up and down that dam for I don't know how long. Twice I had to crawl out and vomit up all the filthy brown water I'd swallowed. Little Jason just stood there mute. Then I found Adam, face down in the mud under 10 feet of icy cold water. I got a hold of him, but his little body slipped out of my grasp before I got to the surface. To make things worse, I had to get out and vomit again because I was full of water. I went back in and got him, and he was entirely dead. I wasn't even going to attempt resuscitation. Then I had a vision of Lama Yeshe. I can't describe it other than to say he was there, standing on the rise on the other side of the dam. The vision was absolutely clear and seemed completely external, outside of me. He appeared to be a little bit bigger than normal, but not huge. He was in robes and bathed in this golden light and was looking directly at me. It was like a reality check, because everything happening right then was pretty unreal. The message I got from him was that there was something I could do about it, that I was not unempowered. I immediately started doing CPR, which I'd recently learned on a building site first aid course. By now, Gloria knew what was happening and had raced off to find a telephone. We didn't have one then. Completely out of the blue, a friend arrived and took over doing mouth-to-mouth. My breathing had become pretty irregular, but I was able to keep up doing the heart massage. I felt Adam's heart give a kick and realized he might come back. When the ambulance came, we took him to the hospital 40 minutes away. We had oxygen on him by this time, and I just kept working away at his heart. A doctor friend of ours happened to be on duty in the emergency room. He took us aside and said, "You should hope he does not live because he's full of very dirty water, has a huge brain edema, and badly damaged lungs." We estimated that he'd been under the water for 10 minutes. Everyone started praying for him, recounted Gloria Soul. Every church in Mullumbimby held a service for him. 2 days later, he was still in a coma, and everyone was sure he would die. Anil Ann was visiting the town at the time and invited us to do a puja. They were doing a puja for Adam, but we couldn't go. We were just too upset. The next day, Adam woke up, pulled out all the equipment he was hooked up to, and sat up. Our doctor friend told us he was completely clean and had only very slight brain damage, which might show up during adolescence. The only sign of it we ever noticed was his poor ball handling skills. He grew up to be a healthy man and became an environmental lawyer. The really surprising thing about the vision of Lama was that it happened to Bill, not me. He wasn't a Dharma student to the same extent as I was. He hadn't even thought about Lama Yeshe for a long time prior to that day. I heard later about a drowning incident in America and learned that the body shuts down at certain temperatures, allowing for just enough blood to reach the brain to keep it ticking. Our dam water was pretty cold at the bottom, so I think that was it. Dr. Nick takes full ordination. With Lama's return to Dharamsala, the hills around Tushita Retreat Center rang merrily with pujas. Geshe Ngawang Dagi officiated at a puja held to welcome them home. Nick Rebush accompanied the Lamas on their visit to His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and sat quietly at the back of the room. Nick was still a novice monk, a Getsul. Here in Dharamsala, he asked Lama if he could take full ordination, the Gelung vows. Lama Yeshe hemmed and hawed and seemed reluctant, said Nick. Then he made the most marvelous arrangements for me, going to a lot of trouble to get 10 lamas there for the ceremony and Sirkon Rinpoche as the attending preceptor. On the big day, he said to me, "You should shame everybody looking for you." Repeat. On the big day, he said to me, "You should shame everybody looking for you," meaning I was the center of everyone's attention. Gen Jumpa Wangdu had been living on the mountain around Tushita Retreat Center since it was founded. As a measure of the respect in which he was held, he was now sponsored by the Dalai Lama's private office. Gen Jumpa Wangdu and Lama Yeshe were still the closest of Dharma friends. Whenever Lama Yeshe visited Tushita, the two of them sat together on Lama's bed in the big room where they laughed and joked for hours on end. But until this time, a certain snobbishness had existed among the Inji students who had learned Tibetan and studied at the Tibetan Library. With a somewhat hierarchical attitude, they regarded the Kopan lot as rather naive and not Tibetan enough. I suppose that rubbed off onto our perceptions of Lama Yeshe as well, said Stephen Batchelor, a serious young man from England who was one of the first Western students in Dharamsala and one of the decidedly Tibetan types, who later became a well-known teacher and author. I don't think it was anything to be proud of, he added, but with Lama Yeshe's teaching tours and new centers opening up all the time, the Dharamsala community couldn't help but be impressed. In all fairness, it was also true that the Inji Sangha members at Kopan looked upon those Dharamsala hippie dope-smoking partner swappers with their own kind of condescension, feeling that they were actually the superior ones and better practitioners, holy monks and nuns. The frailties of the human ego clearly didn't disappear immediately upon entering a spiritual path. Return to Nepal. On November 5, Mummy Max greeted the Lamas at Kathmandu airport. They had been on tour for 8 months and 10 days. Nearly 4,000 people had attended their public talks, and over 1,000 had attended their meditation courses. Their travel expenses were paid for by a loan taken out by Chenrezig Institute in Australia. Unfortunately, everywhere they went, fundraising events for Mount Everest Center proved to be a resounding failure, unrelieved by the mounds of sentimental bric-a-brac they received as gifts. The tour had also demonstrated that Lama Yeshe needed protection from the heat and that camper trailers were not suitable accommodation. Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche were welcomed home to a clean and tidy Kopan. The boys had been out for days picking up rubbish and tidying the gardens. They were thrilled to have Lama back. When he was at Kopan, the place shone, whereas everyone felt hollowness when he left. The boys loved Rinpoche, Lama Luntup, and Lama Pathang too, but that special homey magic seemed to be Lama Yeshe's alone. Among the Sherpa monks greeting the Lamas was Thupten Molam, who had come down from Laudo a couple of years earlier. He was from a very poor family in Solokhombu, who worked for the monastery and exchanged potatoes for their sons' tuition fees. When Thupten Molam's parents separated, his mother took the 2 girls and his father the 2 boys. But Thupten Molam's father was fed up with his meagre existence in Khumbu. One day he came to Laudo Gompa and signed over his 10-year-old son to Mount Everest Center. I spent 2 years working at Laudo Gompa, said Thupten Molam. I didn't even know what my father had done until I moved to Kopan in 1973, and Lama Zopa told me. When Lama Yeshe came back, he told me to work in Lama's kitchen, so I started to help the Tibetan cook Mummy Max had hired. I took the Lamas their meals, did the dishes, and cleaned the kitchen and the Lamas' rooms. Mostly, though, Lama Yeshe did his own cooking. He taught me how to cook. When he wanted me to cook something, he would describe it to me first. One of his favorite dishes was chunks of meat, radish, potato, onion, and carrot boiled up in a big pot with some salt. He also liked bread. He'd make dough from fresh flour, like making a momo, but then he put cheese inside it, flattened it, and fried it. That's what he liked to have for breakfast every morning. He didn't eat much chili. He liked to eat the same thing every day for a month, and then he would change to something else and eat that every day for a month. Peter Kedge recalled one of Lama Yeshe's favorites as a sort of stew with a big dough dumpling, a piece of lamb or dried Tibetan mutton, laksha, potatoes, and vegetables. He was so happy to have that. Augusta Alexander, an American painter and poet who had attended the 7th course, spent the whole of 1975 at Kopan teaching the boys and manning the office. During this time, she was ordained at Swayambhu by the revered Sirkon Dorji Chang. Sirkon Dorji Chang knew I was a Kopan student when he gave me the ordination name of Thupten Yeshe, she said. The translator's mouth dropped open, and he could hardly say it because, of course, that was my guru's name. Sirkon Dorji Chang was laughing at me with his eyes. He knew I was gay. She was known ever after as T.Y. Wrathful Lama. Lama Yeshe often made me cry, said Mummy Max. He'd go on and on and on at me. He had this way of screwing me down while smiling, pushing me to the point where I'd just scream, "Get off my back, I can't stand it anymore." He'd get me on anything he could. It wasn't just me. He did it to everybody. After these explosions, he'd laugh and laugh, pacify me, and then start on something else. I didn't always realize it was all for my benefit, but that was his way to go for your weakness. Yet I never ever thought, look at all I've done for you. I've had enough. I was never a hippie. I never really understood them, but I guess that, in my own way, I was no better or worse than they were. The hippies had some connection with him, that's for sure. Lama said of his students, first you hook them, then you tighten up. Lama Yeshe gave Nick the hardest time of all. He had become serious and authoritarian, and Lama wasn't impressed. One day after Lama had come down hard on him yet again, which he often did in public, Yeshe Kadro found Nick in tears. But everyone trusted that Lama had his reasons and that they were good ones. One of Lama's new tough words was mash, as in, I'll mash him. Over the years, a pattern emerged. Lama only mashed people who had a very high opinion of themselves. Nick had always been successful. He was witty and clever and a natural center of attention. But this was not good for Dharma practice. This method of confrontation is typical of the way some lamas work with their students. It is not anger, dislike, or anything coarse, but arises out of great compassion. Shall I mash him? Lama would ask about some student whose arrogance was causing problems. Lama also said on a number of occasions that his job as teacher was to mash his students' egos. Working with money. One area of contention was Nick's management of the tour funds. There was never any suggestion that he'd ever appropriated a single cent for his own benefit, but the accounts he kept were less than exact. While traveling, they had been given money for this and borrowed money for that, and there seemed no end to the tangle. Lama Yeshe was especially derisive when it came to Nick's bookkeeping abilities. Nick was so keen to raise money for publishing that, just before the group retreat after the 8th Copan course, he set up a venture with a local carpenter. We made puja tables for 70 rupees and sold them to the group retreaters for 150. We called them Inji Lama Puja tables. Our slogan was, "Don't be stingy, buy an Inji." Nick may have been mashed, but he was indefatigable and utterly devoted to Lama Yeshe. Lama Yeshe's main concern was for Mount Everest Center to be financially independent by the time he died. He kept a series of little books in which he wrote down all the financial dealings he had with various people such as Nick, Peter, Marcel, and Piero. Every now and then he reminded them of their debts, however small. Everyone came to fear Lama's little books. The first was a black book, said Peter. Although Lama's notes were not exactly structured, he remembered exactly what funds had gone out and always wanted to know how much had been spent and how much was left over. Lama's interrogation into fund management was always extremely thorough. Money was also one of the main things on Mummy Max's mind. "Where is the money, Lama? It all takes money," she would wail. She was still the principal source of support for the Mount Everest Center boys, and this concerned her. What if something happened to her? What then? In order to provide what would hopefully become an enduring source of income for the Mount Everest Center School, one that would not depend solely on her personal salary, but could continue if she should need to move on, or if she died, Max started a fashion business in Kathmandu, calling her first label Samsara. Around this time, a benefactor offered Max $10,000 to spend developing the education project she was still working on, with help from Wendy Finster, an Australian psychologist who attended the 6th course, and P.T. Shane, a clinical psychologist from the United States. "I felt obliged to hand it back," said Max, "because I knew I wasn't ever going to get it done. I talked to people about it, but I didn't have enough Dharma education myself, and I didn't have enough trust that Lama would always be there for it. Although I was the one acting, he was the one really doing. I was young and had chutzpah, but my instincts told me that we needed big money and business was the way to get it. However, I did draw up a program outlining how this innovative education could work, how to train teachers, develop equipment, and publish texts. I even started developing photo transparencies for it. They were big in education at the time, but deep down I did not feel equal to the task. Unfortunately, the many cassette tapes that Max had recorded of a conversation with Lama about her education were later lost." The 8th Copan Meditation Course. 200 people turned up for the 8th course, many of them veterans of several previous courses already. The more long-term students were increasingly serious about learning to control their minds and stop harming others. Marcel was appointed as the course leader, and John Landau was requested to conduct the discussions. "Lama didn't give me any particular instructions," said John. "He just threw me in there. Yeshe Kadro, Tripton Pemo, Sangha Kadro, and John Fay all returned to Copan from their 3-month Manjushri retreat at Laudo to attend the meditation course. Adrian Feldman came to the course from his one-room cabin in the Australian bush where he had been doing solitary retreat. During his retreat, he had not seen a single person. I'd followed Lama Yeshe's advice and started writing him letters when questions arose but never finished one of them. As soon as I started writing, the answers just came to me. After the retreat, I wrote to Lama and asked when I could become a monk. He told me to come to the course. Among the new students attending this course was John Caton, an American college student who had come to Nepal to engage in individual research. Most people called him Karuna, the name he had been given by a Hindu guru in America a few years previously. On his first night at Copan, he dreamed of a lama bowing and smiling at him in greeting. The next morning I was going to breakfast and I saw this lama walking by, bowing to everyone and smiling. It was Lama Yeshe. He was the one I had seen in my dream. I'd never even seen a photo of him before, said Karuna. Andy Weber, who was studying Tanka painting in Bodhanath, had met Lama Yeshe in Bodh Gaya the previous year. This was his first Copan course. I didn't like the first day, those pretentious Americans with their backpacks and super down gear and polite palaver. Everyone looked so rich and neat, Andy remembered. It was like being at college in the West. The day before the course started, I was standing beside the Gompa looking down into the valley and wondering whether to stay. I turned around, and there was Lama Yeshe's beaming face at the window. He just nodded to me, but I felt a thud of blessed energy. I knew then that I had to stay. But I thought Marcel was a pain in the neck. Sometimes I just had to go down to Boda for a chillum. I got very depressed during Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachings. The only reason I stayed was because Lama Yeshe occasionally dropped in and gave one of his blissful talks, and because he sometimes called me to his room for a chat. He was the message we all wanted to hear. However, we also knew that we first had to walk the path Lama Zopa Rinpoche was pointing out, the same path Lama Yeshe had followed. Some friends from the 7th course had spent the year together in Dharamsala and had then returned to Copan for more. We were a wild bunch, said Jimmy Neal. Wildest of all was an intense young Italian, Stefano Biovella. A lot of people at Copan were very straight. They didn't like Stefano because he was such a hippie, said Jimmy. He spent most of the course crashed out in the front row, looking totally out of it. Then every now and then he would jump up with the most amazing, profound, and poignant questions. He just adored Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He told me he was amazed at Lama Yeshe's deep understanding of Italian psychology and culture after he had spent only 2 weeks in Italy. Some months later, the somewhat unpredictable but charismatic Stefano was ordained by His Holiness the Karmapa. Ha ha ha, you, a monk, everybody exclaimed. I'm glad you did it, said Lama. You'll last 2 months, and he did, to the day. Stefano later took ordination again and disrobed again. Repeat. Some months later, the somewhat unpredictable but charismatic Stefano was ordained by His Holiness the Karmapa. Ha ha ha, you, a monk, everybody exclaimed. I'm glad you did it, said Lama. You'll last 2 months. And he did, to the day. Stefano later took ordination again and disrobed again. Jimmy Neal was present on the day a student arrived at Copan on a huge BMW motorbike. Lama Yeshe might have seen one before, but he certainly hadn't ridden one, said Jimmy. He got on it, put his hands and feet in the right places, and hunkered down as though the wind was tearing at his face. Marcel Marceau had nothing on him. He was a magnificent actor and a superb mimic. One person who didn't show up for the course was the Lama's Lake Arrowhead driver, Teresa Knowlton, the devout and cheerful young girl from Seattle. Teresa had planned to take ordination and was expected to arrive at Copan with gardening tools and a typewriter for the IMI that Nick had given her in California. Time magazine was one of the very few Western publications regularly available in Nepal, and Lama Yeshe usually had a copy. One day he pointed to a paragraph about an Indian Vietnamese man, Charles Sabraj, who had murdered a number of young travelers and stolen their cash and passports. His first known victim was Teresa, drowned on a bench in Thailand. She had wanted to practice Dharma, said Lama, but she never reached here. The message was clear. Anything can happen, so use your time well. More new monks and nuns. Adrian Feldman was preparing to take robes. His girlfriend was at Copan and tried to get the lad to spend one last romantic weekend with her at the lovely lakeside town of Pokhara. I had to check up very deeply, said Adrian. I took my girlfriend up to the hill and pointed to the North Star. See that star? I said. It never moves, and the whole universe moves around it. It is the same as my determination to be a monk. She cried a bit, and we had one last kiss and cuddle. Most of those seeking ordination had already received Dharma names, but Adrian hadn't. He hadn't even taken the 5 lay vows that were often given together with refuge. Lama Yeshe gave the 5 vows to both Adrian and Scott Brousseau, a young American who'd been at the 6th and 7th courses but also hadn't yet received them. Then Lama closed his eyes for a moment and gave Adrian the name Thupten Gyatso, the name of the great 13th Dalai Lama. Elizabeth Jokia was on her way to becoming Lama's first French nun. "I'm not sure about French people," Lama told her. "I don't know so many. George Churinoff went to see Lama Zopa Rinpoche about whether to become ordained. He told me, 'For you it would be good.' So that was that. I thought becoming a monk was really the only way I could practice Dharma, and I had no relationship responsibilities," said George. These 3, Adrian, Elizabeth, and George, together with several more of Kopan's Western students, were to be ordained in Dharamsala early in 1976. In the meantime, Lama Yeshe unexpectedly announced on November 17th that a preliminary Rabjung ceremony would take place the very next day. This was the 3rd group of Lama Yeshe students to request Getsul ordination, and Lama wanted to ensure that their monastic future was well planned. By receiving the 8 Rabjung vows early, they would have some experience of having lived together as Sangha before committing themselves to the 36 Getsul vows. On that day, George Churinoff, Adrian Feldman, Elizabeth Jokia, Electric Roger, Karen Vallum, Roger Wheeler, Peter Kedge, Scott Brousseau, Susie Albright, and Margaret McAndrew received Rabjung ordination together. After the ceremony, Lama told them, "From now on, I am your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your mummy, your daddy, your teacher, and your best friend. You have no worries. Now you have a big party." "We went down to the Sangha Gompa, which was the big room in the old house," said Adrian. "There was a big table of food, and Lama insisted that we sing and dance and play music, all of which are alien practices for ordained people. So we got out the few cassette tapes we still had, such as the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan, drank lemonade, and ate biscuits. We didn't actually sing and dance, and Lama didn't come to the party." Lama Yeshe gave several talks to the Sangha about how to live together as a community. He also had them give Dharma talks to each other in the evenings with question and answer sessions, thus training his monks and nuns to eventually be able to teach in the West. Mahakala, the IMI protector. Lama Yeshe had already explained to Ngawan Chodak that Mahakala was both a protector deity and a yidam. The concept of protectors was something new to the Westerners. Within the Buddha's pantheon, there are protectors of place, such as those the Lamas made offerings to at Chenrezig Institute in 1974. There are also Dharma protectors, some of whom are yidams, others not. Lama decided that the 4-armed aspect of Mahakala was the protector of the International Mahayana Institute, so he instructed the IMI monks and nuns to do the Mahakala sadhana in English every day, as well as a Mahakala group retreat. "He didn't tell us much about protectors," said Yeshe Kadro. "I had the impression he didn't really want to. He was very serious about the whole thing. I watched him go black before my very eyes," and said the new nun, Thupten Yeshe. "He turned into Mahakala, full of wrathful compassion." Lama Pasang thought Lama Yeshe himself was actually a protector. When shaving Lama's head one day, he took the opportunity to search his skull for auspicious signs. Many such physical characteristics indicating that a person has achieved a high degree of spiritual perfection are explained in the sutras. Suddenly Lama said, "What are you doing?" "Shouldn't do." Lama Pasang became convinced that a particular formation of 3 lines was just what he was looking for. "I not exactly see," he said, "but I get good feeling that day, and some hours later I not forget that good feeling." We need an organization. One day, while standing on the Gompa steps with Nick Rebush, Lama Yeshe looked far into the distance and said, "We need an organization to keep all of this together." After the evening discussion sessions, a small group of trusted students chosen by Lama began to meet in the library above the office. This group, which came to be called the Central Committee, included Mummy Max, Dr. Nick, John Landau, Yeshe Kadro, Peter Kedge, Marcel Bertels, Wendy Finster, and P.D. Shane. Lama outlined some definites. He wanted the words council, Mahayana, and preserve in his organization's name. Basically, Lama wanted the organization's name to reflect his work. He was trying to bring not just Tibetan Buddhism, but Mahayana Dharma to the West, and Lama was absolutely certain that given the chance, Buddha Dharma could take hold in any culture. While only a short distance to the north of Kopan Monastery, the Cultural Revolution was wreaking havoc in China and Tibet. Lama Yeshe joked about his own Dharma Cultural Revolution. Lama had been adding the words for wisdom culture to the names of his new centers, though some students were uncertain about this. As usual, however, Lama was extremely clear and felt strongly that wisdom culture defined the essence of the FPMT. What we normally understand as the meaning of culture is the relative mind or spirit, the collective illusions of a certain land or people. It actually has nothing to do with the wisdom truth of Dharma. If we stretch the meaning, we could say that Dharma is the culture of our progressively developing wisdom. I was brought up in a great culture that is 2,000 years old. Now I am working with Westerners. I think the current meeting of East and West is taking place on a gross level, but could develop progressively to a finer level of understanding. I think we must work toward a wisdom culture. Wisdom culture is rooted in the joy, love, and utter dedication to the service of others that both lamas embodied and inspired. Wisdom culture is a synonym for the perfect integration of the union of wisdom and method. Over time, the phrase was dropped as more centers simply used the word institute. Peter Kedge was now Lama's attendant and took the group's ideas to him. One title that they all liked was Yeshe Foundation, which in its longer version, Yeshe Foundation for Wisdom Culture, was employed for a short time. Lama Yeshe's response was, you people have no idea. Yeshe is nothing. Here 1 minute, gone the next. Not important. I want to preserve the Mahayana teachings. If you can't get the name right, you don't know what I'm doing. He did not want some snappy title. What he clearly preferred was Council for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, CPMT. That was used as the name for the organization for a few years, until the CPMT became the name of the approximately annual meetings of all the center and project directors that Lama wanted to happen, and the name of the organization itself became the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, FPMT. The Central Committee meetings often went on until 2 a.m. or even later. Yeshe Khadra would try to grab at least a couple of hours of sleep before attending morning meditations led by Thupten Pende. One morning I decided I definitely deserved a sleep-in, so I didn't go to the session, she said. 15 minutes later, Lama sent one of the boys down to me with the message, Lama wants you to write some letters. I jumped up, bright as a button, amazed he knew I was sleeping in, but he knew everything that was going on at Kopan. The mo, the use of dice for divination, was a specialty of certain lamas. Lama Zopa Rinpoche eventually became famous for his mo's, but no one ever saw Lama Yeshe use dice. His specialty was to roll his eyes back into his head, go silent, and then speak his piece. It seemed to be a kind of internal mo. It is also possible to do a mo by counting the beads on a mala in certain ways. Lama described his own father doing this for people when Lama was a child. Only once did Lama Lundup see Lama Yeshe use a mala in this way. A local Nepalese family came to Kopan complaining about the loss of their precious buffalo and asked Lama to find it. He was doing something with the mala, and then he said, "Go there, that place." When they went, they found their buffalo, said Lama Lundup. I never saw Lama make an observation with either dice or a rosary, said Peter Kedge, who toured with Lama for 4 years and remained close to him. Sometimes people would ask Lama for advice, and he would tell them to ask Rinpoche to make a mo. Sometimes I would ask Lama about various things related to administration or business. Lama would just seem to think for a second and then say, "Should be okay, let do." I always felt that Lama knew exactly what the outcome would be, that it wasn't necessary for him to go through the motions of making a divination. The meditation course ended with the conferring of refuge and lay vows and a Vajrasattva empowerment taken by 20 people. The empowerment carried with it a retreat commitment. Almost immediately after it, one student decided he didn't want to hear any more and left Copan. Empowerments were considered to be serious things. It was felt that if you didn't take the associated commitments seriously, the initiating Lama's energies were weakened. Ablaze with anxious devotion, one of the new nuns ran to Lama Yeshe about the departing student, saying, "Lama, Lama, he's going to hell. He took the initiation and now he's not going to do the retreat." "Dear," said Lama, "if he is not going to do the practice, then we are not communicating. Initiation is communication. If there is no communication, there is no initiation, and therefore there's no downfall. So what's the problem?" The birth of Wisdom Publications. Nick Rebush and many of the IMI Sangha had been actively engaged in publishing activities at Copan since just after the third course. The wish-fulfilling Golden Sun and the various editions of meditation course notes had been published under the imprint of the International Mahayana Institute. On December 8th, Jesse Sartain, an American publisher who was a student of Geshe Ngawang and had been studying at the Tibetan Library in Dharamsala, visited Copan and suggested to Lama Yeshe that the talks from his 1974 American tour be published as a book. Since Nick was running Copan Publishing, Lama called him over and said, "Talk to him, but don't give anything away," meaning the copyright to the Lama's teachings. Lama Yeshe suggested that Jesse's Conch Press and Copan's own imprint, which Lama decided to call Publications for Wisdom Culture, co-publish the book. The Conch Wisdom collaboration, edited by John Landau and his old friend Alex Berzin, printed and bound in the USA and titled Wisdom Energy, was published in 1976. By the 1980s, this publishing endeavor would develop into Wisdom Publications, with offices first in London and then in 1989 in Boston, and would eventually become one of the world's foremost English-language Buddhist publishing houses. Statues and images. It was typical of new students to want to buy a Buddha statue before leaving Nepal. I went everywhere in Kathmandu and Patan and saw hundreds of statues, but none of them appealed to me because they were all mass-produced, said one young man. Then in Bodha, I saw a beautiful statue that had come from Tibet, but was far too expensive for me. The only valuable thing I had with me was a really good pair of German binoculars, because I was a passionate ornithologist. I put a for sale sign up at Copan, but there were no takers. Then a monk came to me to say Lama Yeshe wanted to know how much I was asking for them. Of course, I halved the price for him. The monk came to see me again the next day and told me Lama Yeshe wanted to know what price I really wanted for them. I told him the full amount. He gave me the money, and I was then able to buy that statue. Around that time, Lama sent Mummy Max off to find a Tara statue. I told him I'd go the next day, Max recalled, but he said, "No, now you go and don't come back without it. It's there, you find it." I went all over Kathmandu on what happened to be a Nepalese public holiday, so half the shops were shut. I looked in all the obvious places, went to Patan, the artistic center of Kathmandu, looked everywhere and couldn't find anything. So I started on the back streets. I was exhausted and sure I was never going to find this statue. But Lama knew. He knew exactly, and I'm convinced he led me to it, because I didn't have a clue. Finally, when it was getting dark, I found the perfect statue in a pile in a statue maker's warehouse. When I got back to Copan and showed it to him, all he said was, "Ha!" Christmas. On Christmas Day, the Gompa was packed for a Chenrezig Puja. Once again, Max ensured it was a special day for the boys with a tree and treats. Tupten Wangmo's little son Daja was still living with Jumpa Tinley's family, although Wangmo wanted him to take robes, move to Copan, and study with the other Mount Everest Center monks. This wouldn't happen for another year. Daja now spoke Tibetan much better than he spoke English. Lama Yeshe was always so nice at Christmas, Daja recalled in later years. There was always a toy everyone could play with, but Lama separated playtime from work time and behaved differently for each. He could be so warm, or you could be completely afraid of him. Sometimes we all wanted to be near him, while at other times we were all running away.